between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60p. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello everybody. This is the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, standing in for Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. today on the home of Common Sense. And blimey, what an action-packed show we have with you today. And looking at who I've got in the studio with me, I've got the fantastic Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett, 2 great lefties. One from the south, one from the north, who are going to dice it out with me and keep me in my place, as well as all the lefties sitting behind the glass in the studio who are very, very good at looking after me, bringing me cups of tea and water and trying to keep me on track. And we want to get into our first guest, because blimey, what an honour it is to have an exclusive here on Talk, the newly crowned, he would probably say that's over the top, Lord Gove of, I think it's Tory or Toray. He'll correct me. Tory, thank you, Michael. Tory, for those of you who don't know, is based in Aberdeenshire. He is also the editor of The Spectator. Michael Gove, thank you so much for joining us here on Talk at the home of Common Sense. How are you doing?
Very well, Jonathan. It's very good to see you in that chair. Younger, more handsome and sounder than Kevin O'Sullivan.
Well, all I can say, Michael, is I feel like you're trying to butter me up before this interview, and I'm going to do my best to try and get at least one news line out of you during the show. Now, obviously, Michael, you're going to be wearing your ermine soon and entering the House of Lords. And actually, what I want to first of all ask is, the place that you've chosen to name for yourself as a member of the House of Lords is something that I know is very special to you. For those of you listeners who aren't aware, your father, you've done this in memory of, and it is your adoptive father, not if people weren't aware. And I just wanted to get a few words about why it was so important to you to do something in his memory to honour his great legacy.
Yes, whenever anyone is appointed to the House of Lords, there's an opportunity to take a place that means something to you, and for some MPs it will often be the constituency that they represented. And I loved being an MP in Surrey, but an even more important resonance for me is the example of my dad, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. But he was brought up in an area of Aberdeen known as Torry, which is the harbour area of Aberdeen. That's where he was born, that's where he went to school. It's also where he ran a business that was set up by my grandfather, a fish processing business, a fish merchant's business, which sadly closed in the 1980s when I was a teenager. But as you quite rightly say, I was adopted at the age of 4 months by my dad Ernest and my mum Christine, who's still alive happily and living in Aberdeen. And so I chose Tory as a way of acknowledging the debt that I owe to them for everything they did for me, because all the opportunities that I subsequently had in life are down to their care and love.
Well, that's lovely, Michael, and I think a great tribute to your father as well. And I'm interested, Michael, because you were in the Cabinet for about 13, I think, of the 14 years that the Conservatives were in government, covering a number of roles, particularly in education and in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, where you made some quite big changes, obviously in education, transforming the education system. In DEFRA, you were doing a lot post-Brexit to introduce new agricultural and fishery rules. I'm just wondering, obviously being an editor of The Spectator is a pretty busy full-time job. How often can we expect to hear you speak in the House of Lords? Are you going to be someone who comes in regularly on a wide range of issues, or are you going to focus on any specific issues? And if so, which ones are you interested in?
Well, certainly education and also home affairs and justice will be important. I was Justice Secretary for a bit, but the environment you quite rightly mention as well. They're all areas where I was fortunate to have an opportunity to be part of a team that made a difference. And you will know, Jonathan, having been a teacher on the front line, the impact that those education reforms made, I believe that they were beneficial, but I think even opponents of them would definitely say that they were consequential. And we have legislation being brought forward at the moment by Bridget Phillipson, the current Education Secretary, that seeks to undo some of those changes. Now, obviously, there'll be people in the Labour Party who will be enthusiastic cheerleaders for that, but there are also people, not just Tories, people in the Labour Party who are worried that some of the high expectations that we try to put into the education system are going to be diluted. So I will try to ensure that I work across parties in order to ensure that we can improve this legislation. I'm conscious of the fact that if you're an unelected Lord, the Commons eventually has to have its way. But at the same time, there are lots of people in the Lords who have experience of education, and so far, most of the voices that have been raised in the Lords, including from Labour peers rather, have been suggesting that perhaps Bridget Phillipson should want to change some of that legislation and to keep some of the changes, which, after all, were backed by Labour MPs like Siobhan McDonough and indeed by Labour Prime Ministers like Tony Blair.
Do you consider Bridget Phillipson a danger to the education sector, or do you think that it's just misguided ideological drive that she's pushing and pursuing?
At the moment, I think it's misguided. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt because, having met her, she is personable and I believe sincere in her desire to improve things. The challenge has been, though, that she hasn't explained properly why these changes are coming about. So she's quite rightly said that one of the challenges we have is that there are still a number of schools, hundreds of schools, which haven't seen the improvement that we would want to see. But we know that actually one of the best ways of driving improvement, if a school is underperforming, is to have a successful multi-academy trust take it over, and she is now throwing that into doubt. There are some people who argue, and I think this is probably true, that she's been overly influenced by the teaching trade unions. And again, I'm not opposed to trade unions per se, and certainly not opposed to some of the people in teaching trade unions. But the current leadership of those trade unions is worrying. So the leader of the biggest trade union, the NEU, is a guy who's a self-proclaimed Trotskyist. And now the second biggest teaching union, which used to be more moderate, the NASUWT, National Association of Schoolmasters and Union of Women Teachers, its new general secretary is a guy called Matt Rack, who's never been a teacher, has no teaching knowledge. He was a former general secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, and he's been hired, as it were, in order to take that union to the left. I mean, he used to be in militant, and he's never made any secret, to be fair, about his hard left politics, and that is deeply worrying to me.
And finally, Michael, in the House of Lords, the government will have Lords ministers, normally one per department, and the shadow government, obviously in this case the Conservatives, will have shadow Lords ministers too. If Kemi Badenoch, who you backed so publicly in 2022 and in 2024 to be leader of the Conservatives, asked you to serve on the shadow front bench in the House of Lords, would you accept the offer?
Well, I don't think it's likely to happen. I don't think I would be the right person, but I hope I'll be able to help Kemi and the team in other ways. You're right, I'm a big Kemi fan, and I think that it would be difficult for anyone to be Tory leader, we both know, after the defeat that we endured, because inevitably when you put forward ideas, people will say, well, why didn't you do that in the last 14 years? But this week, I think, may have been a turning point. All of us who watched Prime Minister's Question Time will have seen her give Keir Starmer an absolute tonking on the question of his approach towards women's rights, feminism, and what is a woman. And, the point that she made that he's a Prime Minister without balls, I think really hit home. We've got big local elections next week, including, as you know, in Staffordshire. And I think that, the common sense approach that Kemi takes will resonate. I hope it does with the people that you did such a good job representing for 5 years.
Michael, I'm sure I was going to double check with you, but you see and consider a woman to be an adult human female, don't you? You're happy with the Supreme Court's judgment that came out the other day?
Oh, totally. We're born. You're either born with a Y chromosome or not. If you've got a Y chromosome, it's a biological fact. You're a man. If you don't, you're a woman. A woman is an adult biological female. And earlier today, I was having a chat with someone who used to be a political opponent, but who I have enormous respect for, Joanna Cherry, who used to be an SNP MP. And Jo Cherry, like the former Labour MP Rosie Duffield, was a very brave left-wing feminist who refused to be cowed by the fashion, which was to deny a basic biological truth. Of course, everyone has the right to live their life as they should, but women's spaces should be protected and basic truths need to be upheld.
Now, Michael, you obviously talk quite glowingly about Kemi there. Obviously, she's coming up to around 6 months into the job. And I think it's important to remember it is only 6 months, but still, whispers, as you know, regularly go around Westminster that there are unhappiness amongst backbench Conservative MPs. The recent Con Home survey showed that Robert Jenrick, her nearest rival, has a 60-point net favourability leading over her currently. Is Kemi really actually cutting through? Does she have the ability to cut through, or was she always doomed from the start?
No, I think she does have the ability to cut through. And as I say, this week demonstrated a very clear example of her ascendancy over Starmer on a critical issue that matters to millions of people. I also have a lot of time and respect for Rob Jenrick. I worked with Rob at the Ministry of Justice, and I think that he's set a very good example in opposition of how to drive change. The fact that he, on the whole issue of two-tier justice, took the government to the cleaners on the question of recommendations from the Sentencing Council that would have seen some citizens treated differently in the courts from others. He did a great job there. And I think, the lesson I think we can both take from the last 5 years and indeed the last 14 years is that when there's Tory leadership speculation, it actually ends up only weakening everyone in the Tory team. So, one of the things that I suspect viewers may remember, Jonathan, is that you were one of those people who said, whatever you think of Boris, whatever the criticisms you might level at him, if you get rid of Boris, you are not going to get rid of the Conservative Party's problems. You may actually end up only exacerbating them. And I think the wisdom that you showed then, which is don't panic, stick together. Make sure that you concentrate on the arguments, not the personalities. I think that's good advice that people should take now.
Obviously, you mentioned some quite nice words there about Robert Jenrick, but I can't help but, Michael, tease the fact that you did describe Robert Jenrick last summer as, quote, a Tory boy, in the sense that he was just your stereotypical kind of Conservative. Do you think that actually being a Tory boy right now is more important than ever and able to unite the right?
Well, I did say that I thought... Rob had many strengths, but one of his weaknesses was that he did look a bit like a Tory boy. I did say that, but then I said, but then I look even more like one. So I have an enormous amount of sympathy for him. But one thing I would say, additionally, is that a key element of modern politics is being able to make an argument online and on social media. And I do think that Rob, in some of the videos that he and his team have produced on justice questions, and also on things like the giveaway of the Chagos Islands, islands that we're handing over to Mauritius, and also paying for the privilege of getting rid of. The film that he made about that, laying out the issues there, I thought was a very, very effective piece of communication. And you know Rob well. He is a super smart guy, and I think it's great that he is part of a Tory team, which I hope next week in the local elections will confound some of the doubters.
One of the things I would criticise is that not enough of the shadow cabinet is demonstrating the same energy as Robert Jenrick, and therefore it's relying solely on Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick to kind of be the faces. Do you expect shadow cabinet ministers to really step up to the mark here and start doing a bit more? Because Kemi's been clear, she doesn't want to be the cult of personality. She wants this to be a team effort and that everyone show their strongest face. I think one of the things that Kemi's also suffered from is, quite frankly, no one expected this Labour government to collapse in the polls as dramatically as they did, and therefore didn't have the luxury of what Keir Starmer had, which was 2 years, also cloaked by the COVID pandemic, in order to rebuild the party machine from within.
Yeah, I think after a defeat, the transition from government to opposition can sometimes be difficult for some. And I think Rob has made that, Kemi have made that very effectively, because you've got to punch. In government, you try to, be statesmanlike or stateswomanlike wherever possible. You try to use the power of office in order to do good overall, and you sometimes allow that other parties may have a good point, because you're in control of events, and actions speak louder than words. In opposition, all you have are words. So what you've got to do is to be sharp, acute, energetic, and yes, aggressive. And in that sense, I think, we have seen, to be fair, particularly actually amongst some of the women in the shadow cabinet, that pointedness. Laura Trott on education, Claire Coutinho in duffing up Ed Miliband, and also Victoria Atkins when she's been taking the fight on behalf of our farmers. They've all been doing, I think, a good job, but it takes time. And also, as we both know, the attention is often on the government itself in its first year, and people in opposition parties just have to work that extra bit harder to get heard.
Now, coming back to the whole Conservative Party as we currently are, there's obviously been the news around Robert Jenrick being recorded when he was speaking to, I think it was to UCL Conservative University students, where he suggested, it was said in the recording, that there needs to be a uniting of the right, maybe a coalition, I think was the word used, between Reform and Conservatives. He's come out very strongly saying that didn't mean a formal pact. He wants to actually retire Nigel Farage once again, and he has the full backing. Kemi, in fact, strongly came out saying, give Kemi a break. She's doing, quote, a bloody good job. So do you think, actually, the reality is there is going to have to be some kind of pact, if not officially, a bit what we saw with Labour and the Lib Dems in the last 5 years, the unofficial pact where people step down, or in terms of campaign efforts? Or do you think it's realistic to say that we can defeat Reform? And I say this as well as Nigel Farage has today said, for the first time, performing what is some is calling a U-turn, that now he would allow Reform councillors to, quote, work with anybody, including Lib Dems and Labour, if they were to take control of councils.
Well, I think there are three things here. The first is that if you look at Rob's words in detail, he was talking about a coalition of voters. So what he wanted to do was to say that the Conservative Party's job is to persuade those people who are currently inclined to vote for Reform that the Conservative Party is the best vehicle for getting rid of Keir Starmer and changing the country for the better. And I completely agree with that. But because people look at the current polls, people do a sort of basic arithmetic, and they say, well, if you just add the Tory and the Reform voters together, then you automatically get a government. So the parties should form a coalition. And I don't think that is going to happen. I think also, as Kemi said, the Conservatives win by being the best version of themselves. And it's 4 years before we have an election. Let's make sure that the Conservatives make properly conservative arguments. I think we can win on that basis. The final thing I was going to say, though, is that Nigel's point is similar to the point that Kemi made during the campaign. It's just reality. As we both know, as viewers and listeners will know, at local government level, sometimes no one party has a majority, and so it will work with people from different parties in order to make sure that the bins are collected and that the planning committees meet properly and so on. In my old hometown of Aberdeen, there was once actually, recently, a Labour-Tory coalition, because the SNP were thought to be the incompetent ones there. Actually, I think that's probably right. So in that sense, absolutely. And my view would be that given the debacle that we've seen in Birmingham, where you've got councillors, even from within one party, Labour, who can't deliver, people would think better of any councillor if they said, OK, we're the biggest group, here in Staffordshire, but we're going to work with these guys from other parties in order to make sure that council services that you pay for are properly delivered.
Do you respect Nigel Farage?
I do. I disagree with him on a number of things, but I do respect him. During the referendum campaign on Brexit, when I campaigned for Leave, I recognised that it's very possible that we might not have had that referendum had it not been for Nigel Farage's campaigning beforehand. There are areas where I do disagree with him, but he's in a different political party. There are people in other parties whom I respect, and on the whole, I don't like trash talking people down. I prefer that you should recognise what's strong or powerful in your opponents and pay due regard, and then try wherever possible to win on the basis of your arguments and your ideas being superior. And I think some of the things that Reform have been saying, for example, their opposition to house building, I think are just completely wrong.
If Nigel Farage were to become Prime Minister, and some recent polls have suggested that Reform would have the best chance out of those parties on the centre-right versus Labour, would you be happier with a Nigel Farage Prime Minister, or would you prefer a Keir Starmer to remain as Prime Minister?
Oh, my God. I think I'd have to say anyone but Keir at this stage. So, well, I think I'd probably marginally prefer Keir Starmer as Prime Minister to Ed Davey as Prime Minister. I think I'd probably have to say. But there are people in the Labour Party, and I hope that talkTV viewers and listeners won't drop their mugs of tea or gin and tonics at this point. There are people in the Labour Party who I do admire. So there's one guy, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, who I think is an impressive politician. But
I'm sure Wes will be grateful for your endorsement, Michael. There, I'm sure he'll thank you for that.
But no, I mean, I think Kemi Badenoch should be Prime Minister. She'd be my choice.
And obviously, we've seen the news today. Rachel Reeves, on the way to the US, bizarrely decided to say that she thinks a trade deal with the EU is more important than the US, a sort of odd negotiation tactic as you're going to meet the opposite party to negotiate a deal. And it is causing concern, Michael. It's a deal that's suggesting that we would enter the EU carbon trading scheme, which is more expensive. And for ceramic manufacturers that I know you know well, that would only ramp up prices as well as on household bills. It would mean aligning ourselves with agricultural rules, which is something that we all fought very hard to be able to diverge from and end up with us being rule takers rather than actually having those Brexit freedoms. And indeed, we're now talking about the, quote, youth experience scheme, which essentially to many people is being dubbed free movement by the back door for 18 to 30-year-olds and could essentially be a sliding effect to see free movement returned overall. Is this, in your opinion, as someone who was a consequential figure next to Boris Johnson in the Vote Leave campaign, is this the great Brexit betrayal?
Well, it's certainly everything that you list, it seems to me to be a backward step. So we don't know how big a betrayal it might turn out to be, but I think you are absolutely right. I think the first thing is that we have the freedom to diverge, and that means that in the new technologies of the future, whether that's artificial intelligence or gene editing, which makes plants more resilient and increases crop yields, these are all big things, big Brexit gains. The second thing is control of our fisheries. It matters to me emotionally, given where I came from, but it's also something that matters hugely to coastal communities that were let down. I'm worried that the ability to control our own stocks may go. Thirdly, as you say, it seems as though the government wants us to be a rule taker. And this was one of the problems with the deal that Theresa May put forward, that you go to all the trouble of leaving, only then, Hotel California style, you try to check out, but you never really leave the control of a foreign court. And you're absolutely right about the youth mobility scheme as well. One of the problems that we have is that once people arrive in this country, even if they're coming here allegedly to work or as students, many of them will overstay. Many of them can apply for indefinite leave to remain. And we should be concentrating on making sure that if there are gaps in the labour market, if there are jobs where young people are required, it should be our young people that we should be training and providing with incentives to do those jobs. There are lots of people, I hate using the phrase the establishment, but there are lots of establishment voices that always say, oh, migration is a good thing. The British public are pretty clear about this. We had too much migration. It lowered wages for people on the front line, and it happened at a pace that put pressure on our public services. So for that reason, I am genuinely worried about what's being contemplated.
And final question from you, Michael. You mentioned immigration there. It is still the hot topic. Reform, obviously, really using it as a tool in this local election campaign to motivate voters. And obviously the Sun exclusive today showing that the £700 million of taxpayers' money has gone to one hotel chain, which is benefiting, obviously, from all those who have illegally crossed the English Channel. Do you think it is time to leave the ECHR? Is it the only way that we will truly take back control of our borders?
I think there's a lot that we need to do in order to resolve our migration, and leaving the ECHR is only one part of it. But yes, I do believe now that we should leave the ECHR.
Lord Gove, thank you so much for joining us here on Talk. I know our listeners would have really appreciated your time and your voice. Very best of luck in getting inducted in your ermine, and all the best as well to your role as editor of The Spectator. That was Michael Gove. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going straight to a break. Remember, call 0344 499 1000 or text in the word TALK at the start of your message to 87222 or at talkTV on X. Tell us what you think, what Michael Gove's been saying. Do you think the Conservatives can come back again, or are they a dead duck? We'll see you after the break.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organisations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk, the home of common sense, and you're on the political asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for the fantastic Kevin O'Sullivan today. And let's go straight, first of all, to our amazing guest in the studio, Benjamin, who I misgeographied, if that's a term. He's actually a northerner. I'm the most southern one in this studio, so I'm going to have to put myself over hot coals. Benjamin, what did you make of Michael Gove there saying he would support leaving the ECHR?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've heard him say that before, and clearly it wasn't the line of the governments that he was in. So that suggests that the Tory party is really moving on this. But I think lots of people will be thinking, why wasn't he making that argument when they had the chance to do it, for those people that agree with that? But also, I don't think it's likely to happen. It's not Kemi Badenoch's view. And I think there are so many complications in that I don't think it's very viable.
Matthew, what do you reckon? Do you reckon it's going to help win back some of those reform voters, or will people, as Michael said, say, what did you do for 14 years then?
I don't think it'll win back Reform voters because I think Reform are going after Labour's voters now. I think the Tory voters, are potentially already in the bag. And you have to remember, is it 94 out of 99 of the seats they came second in are Labour seats? So I don't think they're being complacent, but I think it's more the Labour voters they're going to try and pursue, hence the nationalisation of steel talk recently and the Thames Water talk as well that Nigel Farage has spoken about. So, no, enlightening as ever from Michael Gove is someone I actually admired a lot during my time in Parliament, despite our political differences. And yeah, I mean, it's too little too late, potentially, for his talk on the ECHR.
Go on, Benjamin.
No, he is my favourite Tory. But I kind of think he's one of those people, and they exist on both sides of politics. Hilary Benn might be a Labour example, that they're so thoughtful and so intelligent and so insightful that they're kind of too good for modern politics. There's a reason they don't get the top job, because we want quite sort of straightforward, cardboard cutout politicians.
I really like Darren Jones. I got on really well with Darren Jones. Liam Byrne, who was chair of the Business Trade Select Committee, I was on as well. I think these are really great guys and big brains, and it always used to pay me having the old Liam Byrne left a note in the Treasury dig, and obviously I got on with him so well. But look, let's get to our next guest, Mike Jones, who's a migration expert and commentator. Mike, we're quite concerned here, the Sun exclusive, that taxpayers are forking out £700 million to one hotel chain for people to enjoy luxury at the expense of the taxpayer who have arrived in our country illegally. This is Stay Belvedere Hotels Limited, which runs 51 sites, have been the biggest winner of the boat crisis by, I think it's having 210 sites. Oh no, sorry, that's 210 sites in total being used, and they've got something like, I think, 9,000 people in their hotel chain. What's your reaction to this? Is this what's driving people potty?
Yeah, I mean, it sticks to the craw. It's a slap in the face of the taxpayer, and obviously it's quite shocking. I mean, one whistleblower actually compared it to an all-inclusive four-star hotel. You've got entertainers, fitness classes, I believe guitar lessons, and, fresh fruit and meals provided throughout the day. But, this is a situation we're in because we can't detain and deport people in short order, and it's illegal to allow an asylum seeker to be destitute. So obviously you're going to rely on hotels because we don't have the dispersal accommodation available, and this is the kind of crazy situation you end up with.
Well, as you say, the package of support and entertainment that's provided to those who arrive illegally. The reason I think it gets to people's sick to the people stuck in the back of people's throats. There we go. I finally got my words out. Is because it's about fairness, is it not? In places like I represent in Stoke-on-Trent, people are working damn hard. They've seen ceramic jobs go overseas. They've only seen really sort of warehouse kind of work come in. They haven't seen those high-skilled, high-wage jobs that particularly been growing in London and the South East arrive in their community. They're seeing bus services being cut, their roads pothole-ridden, they're seeing their high streets closing, and they're wondering, what is the point of paying all this money in tax when actually we're not getting any of the benefit of it? But people who have chosen to get on the small boat and illegally enter the United Kingdom seem to be getting the best of all the world, both worlds.
Yeah, there's a perception that we have a topsy-turvy justice system that rewards wrongdoers and punishes law-abiding. And I think that perception is quite accurate. I mean, if you look at the illegal channel crossers, they've, travelled through different continents. They haven't claimed asylum in third safe countries. They've exchanged cash with criminal gangs. And obviously they're exploiting our hospitality once they're here. And many of them destroy their documents. A lot of them lie about their age and their country of origin. So, that perception that we live in this topsy-turvy society is pretty accurate. And the money spent on the asylum system itself is not just a sunk cost. We can't get that money back. It's an opportunity cost as well. We could be spending that money on public services, on infrastructure, on transport. But obviously, we're spending it on people who have broken the rules, and the British people are rightfully furious about this.
And final one for me is obviously Yvette Cooper is considering what she's describing as, people close to her are describing as a one-in, one-out EU youth mobility scheme. She's obviously trying to be very careful here, understanding the pressures that are being put onto the Labour Party by Reform UK by saying she would prefer, or people close to her saying they prefer a, quote, capped system in place and that it should be one in, one out. How border security is going to be able to count one in, one out when they seem to have lost control of the borders, I don't quite know. Is this a Brexit betrayal? Is this a free movement through the back door? Is this going to have the sliding effect and we'll see free movement return for everyone? Or actually, for 18 to 13-year-olds, is this a positive thing? Will it help create better growth in our economy, boost our tourism sector, create better coherent strategies, particularly with the university sector? And it's something that we should be welcoming.
Well, I wouldn't say it's free movement through the back door. It's a youth mobility scheme. Is it going to be good for Britain's economy? Well, no, because most of these people are going to be competing with domestic workers for low-skilled jobs, and obviously that's going to artificially keep some wages low in some sections of the economy. The Labour Party are obviously not keen to do this, but they want a security pact with Europe. They want to reduce non-tariff barriers on goods, and they want British businesses to export more to the European continent. And obviously, immigration is going to be one of those key bargaining chips along with fisheries policy. So I don't think Labour are particularly keen on this. I think they will cave in eventually, but the perception is going to be this is a betrayal of Brexit, and Labour Party MPs are pandering to European elites rather than their constituents.
Thank you, Mike Jones, migration expert and commentator, for joining us. We're going to go to another break because of that first long segment we had with Lord Michael Gove. Remember, you can call us here on the Home of Common Sense, 0344 499 1000. You can also text in that with the word talk to the start of your message at 87222, and follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at talkTV. We will see you shortly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Again with me, Jonathan Gullis, on the political asylum, stepping in for the fantastic Kevin O'Sullivan. In the studio, I have Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett. Now, gents, we heard Michael Gove talk about it, where he was obviously against this EU youth mobility scheme. We heard there from Mike Jones also raising an eyebrow too. Matthew, if I come to you first, is this something that we should really be concerned about? Are frothing at the mouth Brexiteers like me going to lose our little minds, and actually reality is that it's nothing that we should be scared of? Or is it a Brexit betrayal?
It depends on what type of medicine you want to be drinking, I suppose, with regards to that. I think whether people like it or not, this will likely be the price to pay with any sort of trade deal, I'd have thought, with the EU, and this seems to have been the sticking point for the EU for quite some time. I think we have to look through the other end of the telescope sometimes as well. Like the idea that it's not going to be great for our economy, people are going to be coming here competing for similar jobs, maybe lower down the ladder. Well, do you not think the same is going to be going the other way, and how many young people can go and get great experience in Europe abroad and bring that back with them? I think that for me is the beauty of things like being in the EU at the time. I was a bit of a reluctant Remainer, but I don't know there's going to be as many positives as there is negatives, but I think any talk of the EU is always going to set some mouths frothing somewhere, unfortunately.
Benjamin, what's your view on it? And also, just if I may add a little bit, is this quite dangerous with where Reform are currently polling? Is this going to be a gift to Reform, or actually is this going to just sort of die a death? Because ultimately, polling amongst 18 to 30-year-olds is going to show this will be pretty popular, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the Remain campaign with Stanley Johnson, the two of us, and one who's now a Labour MP. And we ran the environmental campaign to Remain, so that didn't go very well. And Stanley's a pretty unpredictable person. God knows what he thinks these days. I think that I mean, for example, one of the big problems we have in this country is house building, and the sheer scale, about 1.5 million homes that Labour wants to build in this parliament. We don't actually have enough people in this country who are doing those jobs to fill the number of houses we need to build. And so taking builders from countries like Poland and Eastern Europe would allow us to do that. So there's practical problems. If you go in a pub or a restaurant, certainly in the capital, where they're still doing quite well, you'll see lots of signs for job adverts for, you know, kitchen porters and waiters and stuff. And so those businesses are struggling, and they would probably be 18 to 30-year-olds that would fill them. So I think it would be good. On the reform question, I think the government's made an assessment that if it can make people feel better off and feel richer, something they've not felt for 15, 20 years, then it will pay off. And I think that's probably where they're going to land on this, if they think that people have more money in their pocket in 4 years. I think Donald Trump's politics and decisions might make that very hard, might squeeze that, so, you know, they might get the worst of both worlds.
So I agree with you that I think what a lot of Labour decision making has been about is the long term and betting the house on this economic growth, and that in 4 years' time, ironically just before the election, we'll really start to see quite a sharp turn in house building, wages far outstripping inflation, productivity improving, NHS waiting lists down. And I think it is a danger, by the way, for Conservatives and Reform to sit and be complacent about looking at how things may look now. This is not the election that people are going to be facing. In 4 years, we'll see what the economic circumstances, and I'm worried that the Tories in particular are putting all their chips on this being the sticking point
exactly
for where Labour's going to be at.
It's like when you swallow the medicine and it's really unpleasant and maybe it makes you throw up for a few hours and going, oh, look how nasty that was. But in a week's time, you'll be right as rain. You'll feel great. And if that, I mean, I'm not sure anyone's going to feel great in 4 years. I think it'll still be a bit mucky. But I think that is the gamble Labour has taken. And arguably, isn't that what any government should do?
Yeah.
They should try and actually improve things and let that speak for itself.
Grown-up politics should be about long-term decision-making. I don't think we've seen enough of that. I think we've all fallen into the trap, and I saw it in the time I served in Parliament, of trying to play the 1-2 year game where you get some quick headlines, knock up or refurbish a building and claim success, and actually no serious long-term plan. And particularly on skills, I've always been deeply frustrated that we say we need more plumbers, more builders, but still, education for university is seen as the gold standard, and we have not treated technical and further education as level. And coming to that, we're now going to move on to another really important issue, and this is related to a report being undertaken by the Centre for Social Justice called Lost Boys. I'm delighted that Luke Jones, researcher for the Centre for Social Justice, is joining us today. Hi Luke, how are you doing?
Hey Jonathan, very well, thank you. Nice to see you.
No, lovely to see you too. Now Luke, this is something that a report that I've certainly been involved in. I know you've got actually amazing sort of cross-party support. Mayor Burnham for Greater Manchester, Miriam Cates, former Conservative Member of Parliament, Lawrence Dallaglio, England rugby superstar, also on board with what you're doing here. I thought, can you just quickly tell the listeners, what is the Lost Boys report? What is it that you're looking into so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing the amount of support we've had. It's been completely cross-party, and you might have seen as well someone like Gareth Southgate quoting it in his Dimbleby BBC lecture. So it's been amazing how kind of people are really picking on this issue as a really key issue at the moment. And basically we've gone out with the CSJ, we've spoken to parents, teachers, youth workers, kind of charity leaders, and for the last year or two they've basically been telling us the same thing, that something's going wrong for our boys. So we decided to commission this project, Lost Boys, looking into some of the big social metrics that we kind of measure success by for young people. So, you know, how they're doing in education, how they're doing in employment and their earnings, and you know, are they making it into work? How are their health outcomes? What's their links to the criminal justice system, technology and porn, and you know, families and fathers, all these kinds of things. And kind of the picture we uncovered was pretty bleak. You know, 5.5 million men from the age of 16 to 24 are now classified as NEET, so not in education, employment or training. There's 2.5 million children in the UK growing up without a father. So when we look at boys trying to grow up into young men, you know, who's the positive male role model in their lives they're looking up to? Not to mention all the other things I've mentioned. So, you know, the picture we painted was pretty bleak, but it's been great to see the kind of the recognition that it's received, and it's definitely a project we're continuing to look into.
And my concern is that a lot of these boys, particularly white working class British boys, particularly in Midlands and Northern's communities, are really kind of being forgotten for a long period of time and overlooked. I remember in my time on the Education Select Committee in the House of Commons, actually alongside Miriam, who's I know in working with you on this report that showed that white working class boys were the worst performing, apart from Gypsy Roma, when it came to educational outcomes. And yet for so long we've always heard about the need to have more black ethnic minority opportunities, whether that be through apprenticeships, whether that be through the graduate route. And essentially these boys have often felt isolated. And my concern with that, therefore, on top of the fact that I do think there have been far too many, particularly British politicians at times, willing to jump on and kind of too broadly make out that men broadly are a danger and that boys are growing up as misogynists, rather than talking about a minority who might not be like that. And actually the overwhelming are not, because obviously I like to think most people are brought up well, which has allowed the Andrew Tates of this world to get his claws into these young men, prey upon them, say things that frankly aren't quite mainstream, that there's nothing wrong with men being men, there's nothing wrong with masculinity, there's nothing wrong with having more men in the construction industry, but then uses that as a gateway to hook them in to his very dangerous world. Is that something that you've come across too?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few things there, lots of them we've looked into. So with that first thing you mentioned about kind of toxic masculinity, so we found that about 47% of sixth form students have been told that boys are a problem for society. And we keep banding around these terms of toxic masculinity, and we are running the risk now of making boys think that masculinity in itself is toxic. And that's a really horrible message to be given to young boys. With the kind of, you mentioned the white working class boys in mind, the project itself was very much just focused on boys, particularly poor boys. But where it was particularly acute, we did kind of look at ethnic outcomes. And so you're absolutely right, with education in mind, white working class boys are at the bottom of the pile besides Gypsy and Roma communities. So those white working class boys on free school meals will have the worst GCSE outcomes, as the kind of measure we used. But we looked at other things as well. So within the criminal justice system, being a victim of a knife crime is massively disproportionately affecting Black Caribbean boys in particular. So the whole system was very much disenfranchising boys. But in certain areas, there's definitely places where ethnicity plays a massive part. And just on the Andrew Tate question, you're right to bring him up. He came up in 9 out of the 10 visits we would do across the country. But Andrew Tate isn't actually the cause of this problem.
Yeah.
He's much more a symptom of it, right? So who's talking to boys? Who's giving them hope for their future? Who's making them proud to be a man and a boy? Who's telling them what they should be when they grow up? And Andrew Tate's filled that void because we've not been doing a very good job at it. And I think that's why, it's great to have people like Gareth Southgate standing up and saying, we need more positive male role models. We need more, trusted adults. And it's one of the reasons we've highlighted fatherlessness as a key issue, because there are so many young kids who are growing up without that first positive male role model.
Luke, thank you so much for joining us. Luke Taylor there, researcher from the Centre for Social Justice, on this amazing report called The Lost Boys. Matthew, if I can come to you, because you've always been very open about your backstory. You've obviously interacted with the criminal justice system as well, and overcome addiction, which you've been very open as well, something that I hugely admire you and respect you for. One of the reasons I'm glad to always have you on the show. What do you say about this? You obviously came from that sort of traditional white working class background. What do you say about this issue of lost boys? What do you think the danger is? Do you think this idea of toxic masculinity is too broadly brushed around and actually therefore isolates young boys in particular and makes them feel like they're already perpetrators when actually many of them are yet to actually live their lives?
I think there's an element of that. I think it's very pithy and cliche, but we have to be careful with our words, particularly with people growing up. There's a balance to be had on both boys and girls, and neither of them are bad. I think in my experience, I think Gareth Southgate had it spot on, particularly when he was quoting the CSJ report in his Dimbleby lecture. I think a large part of growing up as a boy, you need people there, role models. I know the CSJ picked on fatherlessness, which I think is an aspect, but I think you can have role models in your life that aren't fathers. I had several football coaches that I looked up to and admired, footballers as well. I had mentors, I had teachers, there was all sorts of people that made me want to be a better person and want to be a better man because they had impacted my life in one way or another. I had friends' parents, there was all sorts of stuff. I think that the issue where I think lots of young boys that are polled will agree that feminism has gone too far and sort of terms like that is because this sort of issue hasn't always had the best messenger. It actually became, from my experience in Parliament, a bit of a left-right issue. The right would tend to want to say, what about the boys? We've forgotten about the boys. What about male role models? And the left would sort of see the right talking about it and go, what about black people? What about ethnic minorities? What about women? What about feminism? And we can do both. And that's why I think this is great that we've got some cross-party consensus on this sort of stuff, because Andy Burnham's a very credible individual in the Labour Party. Miriam is in her own right. And the fact that we've got people from sports, such as Gareth Southgate, such as Lawrence Dallaglio, nodding towards this sort of report, it shows that there's proof in the pudding of what we need to be doing, I think.
Benjamin, keen to get your view as well. And also, Miriam has also regularly talked about it. Access to online pornography is certainly having a major impact on boys and how they perceive women, particularly with the increase of OnlyFans, still stardom. We're hearing about these Bonnie Blue, Lily Phillips as kind of bizarrely becoming celebrities for obviously doing something that shouldn't really be done. I'm just keen quickly to get your opinion on sort of what this report's looking at.
Well, I think, you know, pornography is warping young minds, men more than women, but warping kids' minds in lots of ways because it's not healthy. But what I'd say is that if you listen to lots of primary school teachers, they describe how at the start of primary school, boys are just like girls. They'll cry, they'll hug, they'll explain their emotions, and then they get this emotional constipation as they are told that that's not how boys are meant to behave. And, you know, my dad, I think there's also poor role models. My dad was in prison many times. My dad's been to prison for drug dealing and drug use, Class A, and for killing somebody. And when I was at home, he would try to raise me to not express yourself, to not be camp, which I am a bit, right, as a gay man, to not cry in public, all those kind of things. And so I think you have bad male role models raising bad sons. And I'm actually always I always say the only reason I didn't go to prison is because I'm gay, because I've got brothers that have been to prison for drug dealing because they were following the same example. But I didn't feel the peer pressure to behave like that way because I just knew I was fundamentally different, and so I was able to take a different route. And so you've got these poor male role models and you've got a vacuum there, which is where people end up behaving in those ways.
Well, thank you, Benjamin, for sharing that incredibly powerful personal story too. We're going to go to a break before we catch up with the lads, basically about what Michael Gove was saying as well on the whole range of issues. So remember, come back, join us on the home of Common Sense here with myself, Jonathan Gullis, on the Political Asylum after the break.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organizations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
I'm Jonathan Gullis. This is Talk, the home of common sense, and I'm standing in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum. And I've got in the studio the fantastic Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett, who've been giving fantastic commentary to what they've been hearing so far. Now, I think it's obvious that we're going to have to talk in this segment about the interview with Lord Michael Gove. Benjamin, first of all, if I come to you, Michael was certainly doing some flattery of Robert Jenrick as much as he was of Kemi Badenoch. Do you think Michael is seeing the writing on the wall? Is he sort of rallying for Kemi because he's put so much behind her, but reality is he knows that Robert is probably sitting there waiting to succeed the throne?
Yeah, I think Kemi Badenoch probably wouldn't be Tory leader if it weren't for years of support from Michael Gove. I think he supported her in her first attempt back when, may I remind you, she said we should get rid of the winter fuel allowance, so it's slightly hypocritical that now she spends all her time opposing it. But I think that, I mean, look, we were saying this a minute ago, is Robert Jenrick waiting in the wings? Well, no, I don't think he's in the wings. I think he's front and centre and running the show. And, I mean, it's just, the whole thing is humiliating, right, with Kemi Badenoch. She's just useless. And Michael Gove is more than a capable enough political operator to know that. He didn't go against her, but he must know that the future is not with this leader.
Matthew, what do you say?
Yeah, I don't disagree, and actually Jenrick's got to be careful, it turns people off. I know Rishi ended up leader eventually, but when it was so obvious Rishi was undermining Boris Johnson when he was Chancellor, it puts people off because you're not a team player, so therefore why should we trust you? And I think there's the famous Shakespearean quote, he that wields the knife very rarely wears the crown. I think Kemi's under pressure. Keir Starmer had similar criticisms in his early days in the fact that we didn't really have much policy coming forward. We did have COVID to contend with, and obviously we all remember Hartlepool, and I think if Batley, well, I know for a fact if we'd have lost in Batley and Spain against George Galloway, there was MPs I was working with who were going to challenge Keir the very next morning. So he was under his own little bit of pressure, and I think got a little bit lucky with Liz Truss. And it sounds it's very cliche, but it was so long to go until the next election. He may not be leader, Kemi may not be leader, you know,
she
long
won't
way
be.
to go.
I mean, she's just useless. I mean, she's unbelievably bad at it. In a shock result, you put someone with none of the relevant skills to be leader of the opposition in the role of leader of the opposition, and they don't do a good job. She hates talking to the media. She's ideological, but often on things that, you know, don't really hit home. She's not got gravitas. You know, she can't think on her feet at PMQs. These unbelievably cringeworthy performances where she has to look down at the notes despite the fact that actually the Prime Minister gave a relevant answer, so she needs a different question. I mean, she's just appalling, and every Tory MP can see that because you watch them on the front bench and they're all sort of looking down awkwardly. And the problem is, because there's only, something like 140 Conservatives...
121, you're giving us more. We'll take that, though. We'll take that, Benjamin.
So you've got this situation where she can't replace anyone because, you know, there's no one to swap in and out on the front bench. She should have made her front bench smaller.
Do you think, out of interest, lads, the attack of Rob Jenrick as this Tory boy actually means that if he were to take over, he's going to struggle against Nigel Farage, who, whatever you think of Nigel Farage, people always say, I can imagine having a pint with him, just like they said about Boris Johnson. Do people really look at Robert Jenrick and think, oh yeah, that's the guy I can imagine going down the pub with having a bit of a laugh?
I think that's what he's trying to do with his Ozempic. He's had his haircut, he's boxing, you know, he's one of the lads. I do think, though, in a time where the Tories are saying we're forgetting how to be Conservatives, if you elect a real Tory boy, maybe that gives people more of an identity again. I think he sort of... you can charge him with trying to out Farage, though, and people can see through that, I think. I don't think anybody's going, actually, I trust him over Nigel on immigration and other things. Although I will say he's probably the only leadership candidate that had any credibility because he resigned over immigration matters in government and none of the rest did. Probably with one eye on the future, I will add.
You sceptic.
Yes, quite. Westminster will do that to you.
Benjamin, what do you reckon? Is Robert Jenrick, he might seem the answer to Tory members or Tory MPs who are whispering in the background, but really he's just a pound shot Farage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's kind of like the Tories Ed Miliband, right? He tells them what they want to hear. He's a little bit more ideological and certainly more comfortable with the members and activists, and he can probably get them more riled up, but he doesn't appeal to the country. I mean, you know, he does have that Tory boy look, and not in a good way, not like Farage who gets away with it. He's not a man of the people, and he's not got the gravitas. You know, if I were choosing a Tory leader, I'd go with James Cleverly, but I think the choices are not great.
Interesting, I must say. So I backed Robert Jenrick when it came to to Robert versus Kemi, and
he didn't do well.
And I think, look, I think the charge I'd have against James is, whilst I think he absolutely can connect with the public, I would worry that the policy platform would be more Cameroon, which might have been good in 2010, 2015, but not going to win us back voters in 2025 or even indeed 2028, 29. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm out of touch. We'll find out shortly. But look, please come back after the break. Call 0344 499 1000. Text with the word talk at the start of your message to 87222. Messages on X at talkTV. We're going to be joined by Labour MP Jake Richards for Rother Valley to learn more about the Labour Growth Group. So you make sure you get back as soon as you can.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips, in Leeds it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us carry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12.60. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks
How
ago.
much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
This is Jonathan Gullis here on the home of Common Sense at Talk on the political asylum, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan. We have in the studio with me today Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett, fantastic commentators giving us their views and their opinions. But we have had an action-packed first hour, and we've got an action-packed second hour too. So let's get to our next great guest. His name is Jake Richards. He is the Member of Parliament for Rother Valley. He's a Labour Member of Parliament, I should add, as well. Jake, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Good.
You haven't had to, I know it's 8 o'clock, you haven't had to sneak out of a pub into a pub garden in order to join us today, which must be a relief for you. I know you've been busy out on the campaign trail too. Oh, sorry, I've just learned. Jake's frozen. We'll get him back, though, very shortly. Hey, Jake, sorry, mate. We just had a little freeze there. Are you OK?
Right, I think I'm back now. I hope I'm back.
Yeah, all good, all good. I'm just saying, thank you for giving up a night in the pub to join us here on the Political Asylum at Talk. Jake, I'm quite interested in this. It's a group that I've been praising, which is probably not going to help you. But it's called this thing called the Labour Growth Group, and I'm just very keen to understand what it is. It's about 40 Labour MPs so far that I think have publicly declared their support for it. But I'm keen to just get an idea, because there's this term Blue Labour being bandied around, I see, around Westminster. There's this Red Wall group, I think, by the Labour MP for Bassett Law as well, Joe White, if I remember correctly, as well. So what is the Labour Growth Group? What is it you're trying to achieve?
It's over 100 Labour MPs that are part of the Labour Growth Group. And look, the simple task that that group has is to try and push and urge the government to go further and faster in the central mission, which is growth. And there's a reason why we are so passionate about trying to find the policies and the ideas that will get our economy growing, because the central problem that all politicians and all governments of different colours have faced since the credit crunch in 2008 is that we have had sluggish growth. And that means that we have got higher taxes and worse public services. And one of the key ways out of this kind of doom loop that we've been in is to get our economy growing again. And that's not a secret. Keir Starmer talks about that, Rachel Reeves talks about that. But as a group of backbenchers, we're maybe able to think outside the box. We're able to push the system and to try and look at ideas about how we can get our economy growing again, because it is the only way out of the mess that the country is in. And it's a key part of getting us out of it. So the function of the group is really to think outside the box, to push the government to go further and to hopefully come up with good ideas that the government will adopt.
Now, Jake, some people might say you sound very Conservative. In fact, you're outflanking the Conservatives on the Conservative flank. Is that a fair charge, or is it actually you're picking up what the Conservatives weren't brave enough to do?
I've never understood this notion that economic growth is kind of a conservative idea. You know, actually, the Labour Party, if you look at the Attlee government in 1945, Harold Wilson and the white heat of technology in the 60s, and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, which led up to the credit crunch and the global financial crisis, a long period of economic growth. You know, Labour is the party of work, of good jobs, of making sure people have security in their personal finances and the opportunity to thrive. And for that, you need a strong economy, and growth is the product of a strong economy. So I don't think it's a left-wing or a right-wing concept. It's something that the country needs. Where Conservatives and the Labour Party may disagree is how you get growth and what good growth looks like. What kind of growth we need as a country, and hopefully this government will get that answers right. I think the difference between sort of especially the last part of the last Conservative government and this government is that although there are some things that this government are doing that I'm sure you agree with, Jonathan, on this agenda, and many Tories do, but the last government just lost their way. The last Tory government in the last few years, they got distracted by policies and ideas which were far-fetched and frankly at times absurd. They started fighting one another. You know more about that than me.
Believe me.
3 prime ministers in a few years, so it just turned into complete chaos, and they took their eye off the ball. And to be fair to this government, I'm sure there's lots of your viewers and listeners who will be critical of the government, but to be fair to this government, they are laser focused on this mission of getting the economy growing. Now, of course, the proof will be in the pudding over the next few years, but I don't think they can be criticised for a lack of focus.
Well, out of interest, coming to that point, I do wonder, do you have any friction within the Parliamentary Labour Party, particularly those on the sort of what we call the more left, the more Corbynista wing of the Labour Party? Because what I can imagine is, with a lot of you being new, fresh-faced young Labour MPs, I can imagine, as I saw in 2019 when a lot of us entered the Conservative Party, it does ruffle a few of the older feathers in the party. Or actually, have you been able to bring a broad breadth of the Labour Party into the group to really show, like you say, that you're just laser-focused on delivering what was Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' first mission, was delivering that long-term economic growth?
There's over 100 of us, which I think is a sign in itself of kind of the breadth of within the Labour Party and the Parliamentary Labour Party. As I was sort of saying before, I guess, you know, growth as a mission is not sort of the left or of the right, even within the Labour Party. And actually, part of lots of key aspects of the growth agenda are really high up on the list of people on the left. So, for example, house building. You know, lots of people on the left of the Labour Party, as well as on the right of the Conservative Party, by the way, but the left of the Labour Party see it as a central mission of Labour Party politics and Labour movement is to make sure that, especially younger people, can get on the property ladder, that people have good, warm homes for the future. And that's a key part of the growth agenda. And also growth, you know, we talk about growth and we've been talking about it already this evening. What does it actually mean? Fundamentally, it means about improving living standards for people, so people have more money in their pockets so that they can make better choices and have a better life, to be blunt. Growth is, for growth's sake, is not why we're all in politics. It's to try and make people's lives better. And that is a left-wing idea, it's a right-wing idea, it's just common sense. So, as you would like to say, Jonathan. So, you know, don't see it as an ideological battle within the Labour Party or indeed in British politics. It's about getting the right policies.
Well, what I can say is things like abolishing NHS England, totally sensible, something the Conservatives should have absolutely done. The planning reforms you're introducing, totally sensible, something the Conservatives should have had it done. I would have liked to have seen you be more radical, but I accept that you still made a big stride, and I think the OBR gave it quite a big scoring in its latest assessment in terms of what those reforms were doing. And of course, things like local government reorganisation, which I know locally in these local elections I'm seeing in Staffordshire, the classic politicians moaning and groaning on the ground, but I keep saying this should be a good thing because it can mean we devolve more powers out of Whitehall to communities and give those communities a real say where mayors are working hard, whether that be, you know, I would obviously say Andy Street when he was the former mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Burnham currently in Greater Manchester. We can see the impact good mayors have. Do you think that it's sometimes unfair that that kind of stuff hasn't been given attention? Has it been a failing of the government to not highlight all the tremendous work in that field you have been doing and allowing some of the other decisions that have been unpopular in the short term to overshadow them?
I think it's going to be a big challenge for any politician to make local government reorganisation a cut-through issue with the electorate. Quite rightly,
Oh, sorry there, Jake. We just lost your signal there a bit. We'll just quickly, we'll get Jake back as soon as we can. Very quickly, Benjamin, as we're just getting Jake back on the line. Can I just take your take there? The Labour Growth Group, a good thing for the Labour Party?
Yeah, and I think they're doing this to try and stop the handful of NIMBY, not in my backyard, Labour MPs that have been leering their head. I mean, it's stuff the Tories should have done, like a new runway at Heathrow. A serious country doesn't take 30 years to build a new runway. I mean, it's just nonsense. Expanding Luton, which Caroline Lucas, the former Green MP, said you mustn't do that because if you do, more people will go on holiday and take their money out. I think the argument against building an airport isn't that Britons might be allowed to leave. And then they announced they're going to put that universal theme park by Luton, so it's going to have a great purpose. Stuff like that is so basic. The idea it wasn't done in the last 14 years is just absurd.
Matthew, good thing for the Labour Party. You got the I Heart Labour Growth Group mug at home somewhere?
Not quite. I don't think it's as broad as Jake's making out. I think bar three of the ones I've just looked over, they're all sort of, I would say, Starmer loyalists or whatever else. I think it gives people something to do, and the problem is you can potentially put all your eggs in one basket, because if that growth isn't there, which at the moment some of the things Rachel Reeves has put forward, like the NICS increase for me was totally inflationary, and that way growth was downgraded. If it doesn't pay off, what does that mean for the future of the growth group? I suppose I think you're better off working towards equality. That doesn't always come automatically with growth.
Well, thank you very much. And Jake, I know you're back on the line with us. Thank you for persevering with us. And I'm sorry to lose you halfway through. This is why the Conservative government didn't invest enough in the rollout of good quality Wi-Fi. This is going to be a damning indictment on 14 years. I'm sure I can see an advert coming shortly with my face all over it, which will probably be a good thing for Labour Party getting their core vote out. Jake, I just want to quickly come to the fact that obviously, you've made a really important case, and I think actually it's fair to say, Benjamin meant on it earlier, that a lot of the decisions that you're making are about the long term. You've not gone for the short-term hits, you've not gone for the short-term easy wins. You're making long-term decisions, and therefore it's difficult now, but actually if people hold their nerve, they'll see the win longer term. That's within the Labour movement, as it were, and voters will feel better off for those decisions around the third runway at Heathrow again, as Benjamin was pointing out. But I can't help but point out the fact that, we saw this week figures coming out saying that borrowing was £152 billion in the year to March. That's up 21 billion from the year before, much higher than the 137 billion predicted by the Office for Budget Responsibility, and debt interest spending is now £105 billion a year. Is the reality that whilst Labour is making some of the right noises, the decisions to act into fuel payments, to introduce inheritance tax on farmers, to increase national insurance for employers, is actually undermining the growth message that you and many others are calling for?
So there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? There's no point pretending that we're in easy economic waters. What's going on around the world at the moment is causing massive issues. We've just seen in Germany their growth has been downgraded dramatically as a result of President Trump's tariff policy. And at the same time, of course, growth is a central mission, but we also want to fix public services. So we made difficult decisions on tax. You were discussing the national insurance rise for employers, which has been controversial and difficult. I was speaking to a business in my constituency just this morning, and they were telling me how they found the increase in tax difficult. But at the same time, we've used that money to start investing in reforming and improving the NHS, which means in the last 5 months, NHS waiting lists are down. So there's always a balance in government between ensuring that we can try and get the economy going, that we can help the private sector, that we can keep taxes competitive, but at the same time, trying to make sure that we are investing properly in public services. Because at the next election, there will be a number of tests, but 2 of them right at the very top will be, are people feeling better off and have public services improved? And so getting that balance right is tough. I think the government are making those decisions. I don't think you can say about this government is that they're taking easy options to try and be popular early on. We've made some very difficult decisions, this government, that has meant that we have taken a hit in the polls. There's no secret on that. But the long-term strategy is to try and get the economy going so we can start turning the country around, investing in public services. I think we're coming on to talk about immigration, which is a massive issue as well. And that all these things take time. They're not easy. And if they were easy, then the Tories would have sorted it out in the last 14 years, and they didn't. So look, this is not straightforward stuff, but I think that we're making these difficult decisions now, and they will come to fruition down the line.
Out of interest, how confident are you that people, as you say, will feel better off come the next generation, and public service will have improved? Or, as you've said, and I think sometimes it's easy for Labour to forget that Conservatives face some of the global challenges, things like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine too, but do you think that President Trump, with his tariff war, particularly with China, obviously the Ukraine conflict continuing to go on, do you think that's just made the mission harder, or does that actually help you to make the argument to government that they need to go further and be more radical? And some of the things we're talking about, some of the quangos, some of the regulations that might get tore up, this is actually the perfect opportunity for a government to really be quite revolutionary, not since probably, in my opinion, since the sort of Thatcher government of the 80s, changing the whole economic model of the country.
I think that's right, that a part of the function of all backbenchers, but these different groups that form within Parliament, is to try and push the government to go further and faster. And that's right. So one of the things that I've been trying to push the government of is public service reform. There's two sides to the coin of this the difficulties that we find ourselves in the country. One is that we have sluggish growth and have had for the best part of 2 decades, which means that taxes are high, living standards are stagnating, if not falling. The other side of it is that taxes are high because public services are not working for people. And that means not just more investment, but we need to completely rewrite the rules of how we deliver public services in this country. It's one of the things where I think actually the government get it. They're talking a good game, if I can put it like that. Keir Starmer and Pat McFadden have made really quite radical speeches, which perhaps haven't got as much attention as they should. But obviously, the devil's in the detail, and I'm going to be looking to see what the government do on that agenda in terms of NHS reform and Wes Streeting, what's happening with the schools agenda, and also just public service reform in general from the Cabinet Office, so how we do government in this country. I've been pushing the idea of a digital ID, which I think could completely transform a lot of different public services that we offer, that can make it easier for the citizen to engage with public services, can make it much more efficient, save money, and be popular, as it happens as well. And, you know, that's part of the role of being a backbench MP, is to try and push the government, hopefully offer some new ideas. And that's what I'll continue to do for sure.
Well, I fully back you on the digital ID. I saw it in Estonia firsthand back in 2019. It makes total sense and actually could help slim down the bloated bureaucratic state by allowing residents to actually interact with the state much more effectively using modern technology. But I'm sorry, Jake, if that doesn't help your cause. Maybe I'm not the cheerleader you were wishing for.
My cause back by 5 years, Jonathan. It's a real blow to the campaign, actually, but thank you nonetheless.
No worries. Well, look, if I could come to a couple of news stories. First of all, The Sun has broken a story that Stay Belvedere Hotels Limited has now pocketed around £700 million of British taxpayers' cash by housing people who have illegally crossed the channel in small boats. Earlier on, we had Richard Tice on the Drive Time show with a view. I just wondered if you could quickly listen to what Richard had to say and then give your response to what Richard said, and also this story too.
These people who've come here illegally, they've broken the laws, they've paid smugglers, possibly borrowed money, but they basically paid these smugglers, and they're coming and basically abusing our generosity and hospitality.
Do you think, Jake, that they're abusing, or do you think that ultimately this is just a problem that Labour have inherited?
It's certainly a problem that we have inherited, and we've got to get a grip of it. Look, I agree with Richard Tice to the extent that this is a complete disgrace, these figures that we're seeing, that these private companies are making a fortune on the back of a broken immigration system and some pretty vulnerable people. You know, we need to stop these boat crossings. They're terrible for our security. They're terrible for lots of reasons, but we also know some of the people come incredibly vulnerable, and these private companies are making money out of them. I think the whole thing is a classic example of just a broken system, and we need to fix it. And in fact, I'm on the Home Affairs Select Committee, and on Tuesday we're hearing evidence from a number of people on exactly this, these contracts that have been given out by government, and dare I say by the Conservative government, to private companies to accommodate asylum seekers. And it is taking the proverbial, to put it mildly, and we've got to get to the bottom of it. So I'm hoping I can play a role on the Select Committee in holding the previous government to account, but more importantly, offering suggestions about how we can improve it going forward. Because it's not good enough. It's not good enough for the taxpayer. It's not good enough for the people in the hotels as well, frankly. The whole thing is just a disgrace, and we need to get a grip of it. So, look, I think this is something that, again, across the political spectrum, we recognise that we have to do something about this, because it's not good enough. Now, what that is, we may disagree, but certainly we all agree on that.
What I can say is, in my experience, when I was a member of Parliament, Britannia Hotel chain, which is actually one of the worst rated regularly in the country, in Stoke-on-Trent, they were happy to have their hotel rooms filled because, of course, that means no staff to have to pay wages for, huge cash incentives. And I agree with you, it's corporatism. I'm very pro being a capitalist, but corporatism, where it's all about self-interest for those executives to pay themselves massive bonuses and dividends at the expense of the taxpayer, I find to be utterly shameful. And I wish you the best of luck in your work. But you will also appreciate, I have got to say that, you know, since Labour have come in, we've seen now 20,000 illegal migrants enter the UK in the time since the start of 2025. That's up 40% on the figures in 2024 and up 80% on the figures in 2023. The charge that's regularly used by, yes, Conservative and Reform opponents, but also by some of our talk listeners, is that Keir Starmer made a promise to smash the gangs, and it's just yet another broken promise.
It's not good enough. We have to get a grip on it. I would say a number of things to push back. At the same time, I accept all the numbers you said, Jonathan, and as I said, they're not good enough. We have deported over 25,000 people, I think, who shouldn't be in the country, who are now not in the country. That number is considerably better than previous governments have been able to do, and there's been a massive emphasis on that. But we've got to do more to sort out the illegal immigration system. And look, I expect the government to do more. I'm not a member of the government, and I'll be holding them to account on that because it's a massive issue for my constituents, just like it was for your constituents too. I know that. And people feel not only are they worried about security, not only are they worried about the effect on public services, but also just the inherent unfairness of a system when people are struggling, that we are spending millions of pounds a day to put people up in hotels because we don't have a functioning immigration system. It's not good enough for any country, but let alone a developed country like ours. So look, not good enough. I think just watch this space for government policy on this and in this space, and I'll be watching it very closely as well, because if it's not good enough, I'll say so.
Out of interest, Jake, the problem is that, as you said, the government's been willing to take unpopular decisions in the short term. You've then got, obviously, the small boat crossings numbers up, which I know you're not happy with. Are you personally concerned that this is just opening the door far too much to Reform UK? Do you think Reform UK is a serious, credible threat, or do you think they're just a moment in time?
No, we have to take the threat that Reform pose electorally incredibly seriously. You just have to look at the polls, you have to look at election results we've had in council ward by-elections, and I'm sure that Reform will do, have some impressive results next week. We have to take it seriously. And that's not just me looking at numbers and looking at what's happened in Britain. Look what's happened in America. Look what's happened in Germany just a few weeks ago. Look what's happening in France. In fact, in Spain as well, we're seeing the rise of kind of a populist right-wing party. So look, Reform are a massive threat to Labour, and anyone who thinks otherwise, or anyone who sort of thinks it's all just a phase, I would tell them to that they are being very, very, very naive, to put it mildly. And so, we have to face up to it. And to be fair again, I think the leadership of the Labour Party understand that, and I know that my colleagues in Parliament do.
And then finally, obviously, we've had a lot of talk today, and I say this because, again, some might say this could be a gift to Reform UK. The UK-EU trade deal that may, and obviously it's rumours and speculation, we haven't seen detail yet, may see the UK give up more fishing rights, may see the UK allow this youth mobility scheme for 18 to 30-year-olds, essentially what some would describe as free movement for that age cohorts, may see us align with the EU on agricultural standards, therefore giving up a Brexit freedom, and enter the EU carbon trading scheme that will make it more expensive and harm into energy-intensive industries and increase household bills, as again being reported by some in the industry. Do you think actually this is could be perceived as a Brexit betrayal, or is this just sensible? Is it time to have that closer, deeper relationship, particularly in light of Donald Trump's trade war with China and the impact of tariffs is having around the world?
The first thing to say is, obviously, this is all speculation. I've read the same newspaper articles as you. But what I would say is a few things. Firstly, I don't think that this kind of notion of a Brexit betrayal, I'm sure Richard Tice and Nigel Farage will bang on about it till the cows come home, but I'm not sure that's going to cut home with people. There's a lot, my constituency, 66% of people voted to leave, but they really want to see the country starting moving forward and getting things done, get the economy going, get investment in the NHS, sort out the immigration problem. They don't want to have battles about the backstop and deals with Europe. So anything that will improve our economy, improve our ability to have good government and get the country going, I support. And if that means a closer relationship with the EU, then so be it, because I think my constituents would support that too. On the particular issue of this youth mobility scheme, I don't know what the details may be. It's all, as I've said, complete speculation. But I would just give a word of advice to the Conservative Party. It's not something I'm in the habit of doing. But if I was Kemi Badenoch right now, I would be very careful about opposing anything like this. The Conservative Party, I think, finished 4th at the last general election with voters under the age of 35. And, you know, lots of people in my constituency, in your old constituency, young people who are ambitious, who want to see the world, who want to work in different sectors, who want to learn a language, want to go to the EU sometimes. If we can make it easier for those people to do it without increasing the levels of immigration dramatically or indeed at all, then I think, you know, that's something that we need to think about. That isn't, I don't think anyone could seriously come on your TV show and suggest that that is a kind of Brexit betrayal and a return to freedom of movement by allowing young people to maybe go and experience working in Spain. You know, come on, let's be serious. We've got to grow up. One of the big problems in the last parliament and one of the big problems that your party found itself in is it just didn't have a serious debate on Brexit enough. It didn't have a serious debate on immigration. It kind of went off on a tangent with Rwanda. It didn't have a serious debate on kind of freedom of movement because it was so scared of its own tail and what had happened in 2016, and it was them terrified of Nigel Farage and reform. So we can't be, you know, we have to, my previous answer was we have to be worried about reform, of course, but that can't stop us being good governors. And ultimately, if there is a deal to be done and if that will strengthen our economy and make it easier to make this country a better place, then good.
Jake Richards, thank you so much, Labour Member of Parliament for Rother Valley, for joining us here on Talk, the home of common sense. We're going to go to a break and then we'll come back and make sure we get Matthew Talbot and Benjamin Butterworth's views on what Jake had to say. Remember, call us 0344 499 1000. Text in the word TALK to the start of your message at 87222, and you can follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organizations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. This is the home of common sense. I'm Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan here on the Political Asylum. And for the remaining hours, hour and a half now, I've still got, I know, can you imagine, I've got Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Talbot in the studio, and we are going to come and get their response to what Jake Richards MP was saying, Labour MP for Rother Valley. But first, we're delighted to have on the show another amazing guest. It is action-packed today. We have former Olympic medalist swimmer and author of Unfair Play, Sharon Davis, who I am a huge admirer of. Sharon, it's great to have you on the show. How are you?
Oh, well, it's nice to speak to you too, and good luck, Jonathan. Are you enjoying yourself?
I am indeed, and I'm particularly delighted because I think you and I were both popping the champagne, albeit I'm a teetotaler, at the idea that we have seen finally common sense return to this British country by having the Supreme Court decision that sex means biological sex, and actually now we're seeing some sports like pool saying that, from the Ultimate Pool Group, that trans women will not be eligible in the female category. However, it's still quite depressing from what I can tell that we're yet to hear from the English Football Association and the England and Wales Cricket Board whether or not those rules will apply to their sports as well. First of all, what is your reaction to that Supreme Court judgment, and what do you make of the fact that we're starting to see common sense return?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a very good day, obviously, for sportswomen last Wednesday. I've been fighting now for 10 years just to bring common sense back into the world of sport, based on peer-reviewed studies and the obvious fact that male and female performance is extremely different. You know, women get 4% of the sponsorship dollar across the world, right? So we get a tiny, tiny slice of the sports action. And for the last 10 years, we've been told we're not even allowed to have fair sport. Now, a lot of sports have actually protected female category, but often only in the elite category. So that's 1% again. So 99%, or recreational or pathways or juniors, they're not being protected. So what I could never really understand is how any organisation could go, you women over here are good enough, so you're worthy of us protecting you and telling you that we're going to reduce your risk factor and give you fair sport. But you 99%, you're not worthy. You're going to have to carry on competing against men in an unfair environment. And that, to me, just never made any sense at all. And that's what the FA and the ECB, you know, they've been doing, is they've not been protecting all women. They've only been protecting the absolute elite. And even that took a very long time to get them to actually do. So it was a very big day for us last Wednesday. Without a shadow of a doubt, it's very clear now. And what a lot of people don't realise is the Supreme Court didn't do anything last week other than clarify the existing Equality Act, which has been there since 2010 and has been misrepresented continually, particularly by Stonewall, in the world of sport and other areas too, but particularly in the world of sport. I've seen it. I've seen what they've actually written to sporting bodies, and they were deliberately misrepresenting the fact that, you know, we are allowed and we're always allowed to protect the female category. So, you know, I mean, you talked about the pool situation. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a final of Ultimate Pool. We had two men competing against each other in the final of the Women's Ultimate Pool, who won more money than the 14 finalists that were females behind them. I mean, and £48,000 have gone, you know, from the women's pocket of pool in the last few years into the pocket of men saying that I identify as women, when, as I mentioned, we get this tiny little bit of money anyway. So it is a massive injustice. And also, what message is it telling young girls? And one of the most heartbreaking stories that I've had over all the years that I've been doing this is from parents of children in primary schools saying that they've had, you know, mixed race sports days at primary schools so that they're not creating a problem for anybody, and not a single little girl has won anything all day. And I mean, I just don't understand why we would want to give this message to our young girls when that's 51% of us in this country that are female. So I have great sympathy for anyone that has gender dysphoria. However, we do have to live in the real world, and biology matters.
I think this is what drives me nuts as well, and it certainly drove the people I used to serve in Stoke-on-Trent nuts as well too. I think actually the British community, society, is extremely open-minded, and if people go through gender dysphoria, there is of course huge concern for what is, you know, something that needs to be treated with mental health professionals and guided through the appropriate manner. Of course, there's also the ability for people who should be allowed to live their lives in peace and in safety, and no one wants anyone to be discriminated against. But when we started seeing some of the nuts stuff that was done, you know, for example, actors who starred in the Harry Potter films, who had made tens of millions of pounds off the back of J.K. Rowling's hard work, disowning her because she simply wanted to be based in biological reality. When we saw adverts for Nike shoving biological men in women's clothing, again, taking opportunities away from hard-working female athletes who are dedicated to their life, to the profession. When we saw in our schools, again, biological reality being questioned, when this was a question I thought we were answered well before the time of Jesus was born at the end of the day. It just blew my mind. And it was something that I remember in Parliament going, I'm going to have to speak up because I can't just sit and stay silent when I'm seeing this lunacy play out. And I actually remember Nia Griffith, the Labour MP, talking to me when I raised about the fact that my daughter was born with the chromosomes that make her a girl, and that's not up for debate. And she was talking about the gender that was assigned to her at birth. I mean, I nearly spat my water out as I was listening to that because I just couldn't get my head around.
It's not assigned, is it? It's observed, you know, for starters, you know, and in fact, it's observed even before they're born. You know, I've got 3 kids, every single one of them, I was told what I was having before I actually had them. So, you know, we know damn well that the reality of biology, you know, and intersex people who actually much prefer to be called DSD, differences of sexual development, they hate the fact that they're used as a gotcha. They represent an absolutely minuscule part of society, but every single person that has a DSD, which is a different of sexual development, it doesn't mean that they're in between sexes or they're both sexes. It means that sexual organs have not developed properly and there's a chromosomal issue, but they are still male and female, every single one of them. So, you know, this is not the gotcha the trans community tend to use, and those people absolutely loathe being used, you know, in that way. So we need to be honest, we need to be fact-based, we need to be respectful of all of us, we need to find third spaces if that's what we need to do. But for 5 years, we weren't even allowed to have the debate, Jonathan, honestly. I mean, we weren't even allowed to present those facts. You know, it was really difficult. And if you mention the fact that a transgender woman was a biological male on social media, you would be banned, you know, even for actually telling the truth. So it was very, very difficult. So it's no wonder that those people were celebrating. What I think is very, very telling is those women celebrated with a glass of champagne after fighting for years, all right? And, you know, yes, J.K. Rowling gave £70,000, but nearly £300,000 was raised by women giving 10 quid, all right? So this is not all about J.K.
Yeah.
This was about women coming together to try and protect women. And believe me, they will find more £10 if they have to carry on fighting and suing and going back to the courts to get this law, you know, implemented. And I will do the same. You know, if I have to take the FA to court to protect our young footballers so they don't have increased risk of injury, and that they get their fair sport free from males, then I will do that.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon. But before you go, I just want to quickly ask you this one final thing. A Labour peer, Lord Cashman, has claimed that Friends were looking to leave Britain after the country's Supreme Court ruled that transgender women are not legally women. In fact, he claims that they're looking for asylum abroad. Is this just more of the gender ideology madness?
I think we have to look at what happened last weekend. You know, the terrible behaviour in Westminster Square, you know, 7 statues vandalised, males peeing all over the place, vile signs asking for the death of people. That is not what you will ever see women asking for. I've never seen a woman ever ask for the death of a trans person. You know, they're just asking for their rights. And the difference is this is about women wanting rights, not actually aiming at anybody else. Whereas there is an awful lot of visceral that comes from the trans community towards women. And women do get frightened too. You know, they are frightened about being in a confined space with a 6'2" man that's wearing a wig. I mean, they are scared by that. So, you know, they don't speak about it because they feel very intimidated and they get attacked. But believe me, they feel that way.
Thank you so much, Sharon Davis, former Olympic medalist and women's rights campaigner. Thank you for all that you've done. We're going to have a quick break, and then I'm going to make sure I get Benjamin and Matthew's response, who are with me in the studio. That's Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Talk, before the people behind the glass say use their full name for the 5th time to me in my earpiece. I'm sorry for doing that. We are the home of common sense. This is Talk. I'm Jonathan Gullis. Tune in and make sure you call us 0344 499 1000. Text in the word TALK to 87222 and follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, this is the home of common sense. I'm Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan here on the political aside. Remember, call 0344 499 1000. Text in the word talk to 87222 and follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at talkTV. Benjamin Butterworth is joining me in the studio. Matthew Torbett is also there. I almost merged their names into some amalgamation before the break. But Benjamin, Sharon Davis being obviously very happy about the Supreme Court judgment, saying obviously about the scenes in Westminster that she felt was a very intimidatory environment, very a big credible threat, and that she wouldn't see women say that about trans women. What's your response to what's going on with the Supreme Court judgment? Is it being jumped upon and used as a political football unnecessarily?
Well, she doesn't understand the judgment, because it didn't say you can't have trans women in a women's space. It said that you're allowed to block that, but not that you must. And it actually explicitly said it's not for this court to adjudicate on the debates happening in wider society. So it opens more problems than it solves, because that's not particularly helpful. But if places say that the only definition is biology, well, that means that you have to have people with penises in women's toilets, because transgender men exist, people that went from being female to male. They've had a medical transition. They've got muscles, testosterone. They've got a penis. They have to go in women's toilets under these rules. They do.
No,
hang on, Jonathan. What is biology?
I honestly,
they are biologically women.
They're not biologically women if they've got a penis. They're not biologically women if they've got a penis.
Do you want a transgender man?
A transgender man, yes.
Was born as a woman.
Yes, born as a woman.
And then
they should have a nice third space for them to get dressed.
And they've had an operation
to keep them safe,
so that they physically have changed. They will have had testosterone.
They haven't got a penis.
Okay, well, they
haven't got testicles.
Well, they will have been presented. They would have had.
They can still give birth to children.
But my point is, those people will, in some cases, look as much like men as you, and they have to go in the women's toilet.
I hope they don't look like me, by the way, because that's a bad indictment if they look like me.
But how is that helping anyone? That would make it easier for an actual pervert, an actual predator to do it. They'd just say they were a transgender man.
No, not at all. You cannot put a biological woman in a men's changing room. That is dangerous in itself, because there will, of course, be some people seeking to take advantage, just like there are lots of too many in prison. And what is it? Ridiculous ratios we've seen of men in prison who are claiming to be a woman in order to access women's only prison spaces. This is what drives people nuts, Benjamin.
But look, so first of all, Poole, which was the story he did, banning trans women from Poole, I don't know what difference it makes about
height,
gender,
reach,
but
arm
I tell
span.
you what. When it comes to most sports, should a transgender woman be in that? So someone who's born male? No, it's obviously unfair. When it comes to rapists being in a women's space that say they're trans, because some of them seem like quite dubious claims, obviously that's not fair. The one in Scotland, the Isla Bryson that Nicola Sturgeon defended, Nicola Sturgeon did more to row back transgender people's respect in that decision. It was obviously ridiculous. But I'm sorry, what other group in society would you base the rights and the boundaries of 99% on the 1% that has done something as deplorable as raping someone and gone to prison? You wouldn't. I don't think that's a basis to judge the normal people trying to lead their lives. And Michael Cashman, the Labour peer that you referenced, or he was a Labour peer, who has said that his trans friends are concerned about this, they are terrified, because some of them look like the gender they identify and some of them don't quite pass, and they just want to get on with their lives, and they don't want people lecturing them when they try to use their
I don't want loads of biological men out on the street lecturing me that my daughter, that my wife should be in a changing room with a biological male either. Everyone was happy until the nutters got out the asylum and started all their ridiculous, banners all over the place saying cisgender, which is not even a thing, and ultimately threatening the safety of women by saying that how dare you stand up for your rights and freedoms. I don't want that. I was happy to ignore this topic because ultimately I think that if someone has got a gender recognition certificate, they should be treated with respect. But you don't ask me to defy biological reality that's been in place for millennia.
But first of all, the legal right to change your sex is 21 years in law. Where do you think they were using the loo for the last 21 years? Right, obviously, and it wasn't a problem until very recently when a broader debate got up. So, they've been doing this perfectly fine. And the idea that I always think of someone I knew called April Ashley, who was probably the first person to have a gender reassignment in this country in the 60s. incredibly painful and experimental. And she lived as a woman until she died in her 70s. She was a little old woman. Nobody would have ever perceived her to be anything other than born as a woman. She'd been a woman for, 60 of her 75 years or whatever. The idea you'd send her into the men's loos at the Trafford Centre, I mean, it's absurd.
We can have
It's
third
something.
spaces. We
And
can
let
have
me tell
third
you,
spaces created.
It's dangerous for those trans women to be put in a men's change room or a men's loo. They don't deserve that.
Matthew, I am going to come to you, but I've got the call in the ear to make sure I go to our next guest. So hold on whatever you're thinking and unleash it, I'm assuming, upon me rather than upon Benjamin, but we'll find out. We're going to take a big step into another topic. We're going to speak to Mike Ingram, who is an independent market strategist, who is kindly joining us today. Hi, Mike. Sorry, I was getting a bit heated there with Benjamin on this particular issue. Benjamin makes good points. I do accept them, but obviously I just get a bit impassioned. But I'm not going to go on this topic with you. What I am going to go on is, obviously, we've got Rachel Reeves over on to the US and has bizarrely said that the trade deal with the EU is more important than the US, which seems an odd way to start quite a serious negotiation. First of all, your take on this. Is the EU trade deal much more important than the US deal? Was this a mistake from Rachel Reeves to be quite so open? And what can we expect, if anything, from the US kind of deal?
Well, I think the optics are bad, clearly, particularly given how thin-skinned the Trump administration seems to be. But, I mean, like successive chancellors, I'd say that she's technically correct in a very narrow sense. But there's a lot of subtext. There are a lot of things that she omitted. So, for instance, if you look at the top line number on EU trade with the UK and US trade with the UK, then, yeah, you say, well, 41% of exports from the UK go into the EU. 21% of UK exports go to the US, so you'd say, well, it's roughly twice as important. But here's a bit of subtext, for instance. So that number with the EU has been going down for 20 years. So it's becoming a less important trading partner. It still is the single biggest trading partner, but it's becoming less important. Second thing is, for instance, that we don't even know that the trade numbers that we're looking at are reliable. Now, we know there's all kinds of problems with the OBR, the Office of National Statistics, and bad forecasting. We don't know how many people are in the country, for instance. We have similar problems with trade numbers. So, for instance, a lot of things which were once counted as UK exports were actually re-exports, so they were actually just rebadged and then sent straight out. That's gone. A lot of stuff which was previously classified as good exports are now classified as services. So Rolls-Royce is a particular example of that. About 60% of its exports are now classed as services. Doesn't come up in the goods numbers at all. And in terms of the more recent trade data, they'd say, well, post-Brexit, the UK has underperformed on exports, therefore we need to be closer to the EU. Well, again, that's actually questionable, because if you actually look at where the UK has taken a hit on its trade numbers, I'll take the biggest example. It's the auto industry. It's the largest single sector. Now, the auto industry has been bad throughout the whole of Europe. I mean, just look at Germany. The auto industry in Germany is in a dreadful place, has been for the last 5 years, and it's contributed some very weak numbers. In the UK, actually, what's happened, we've gone from sort of being more of a mass producer of, everyday saloon cars to sort of luxury cars. The value of it has actually stayed relatively stable, but people like the Office of National Statistics haven't picked up on that. So there's lots of this technical stuff going on behind it, and I question actually how much of a problem Rachel Reeves is seeking to address. And let's be clear as well, just to round this off, seeking a closer trade deal with the EU is not costless. Not only for the fact that they're going to want something in return, and we've already got a fair idea of what that might be, so maybe extra fishing and so forth, but also, in a world which is very focused on tariffs right now, look at the non-tariff barriers in and around EU trade. Things like packaging, labelling, all the sort of distribution verification you're going to have. There's a whole list of regulations, and we know that. And when you apply that, not only does that actually help to make trade links less dynamic, but it also kills your domestic economy. If you'd have to say, well, if we wanted to align with an economic model, would it be the US or would it be, the EU? You'd have to say, given the sort of forecasts that are out there now, IMF just last week, Germany's 0% growth forecast for this year, and they spent most of the last 2 years in recession. So yeah, it's tricky. As I say, technically she's correct, but what is the problem? And I'm pretty sure that they're going on numbers which are wrong. And that's throughout the industry, unfortunately. And I'm not sure that getting closer to the EU in any event should preclude a trade deal with the US. After all, we do notionally have an independent trade policy.
Mike, I'm so sorry, but I have to go to break. Can I just say thank you, though, for covering everything that you did, though. It was very, very important, and there's lots to take away from that. And we will have more fiery debate after the break with Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett to hear that. Thank you to Mike Ingram, independent market strategist. We will see you shortly.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organizations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. this evening, and I've got in the studio with me Matthew Torbett and Benjamin Butterworth, two fantastic co-stars.
You say fat?
No, fantastic. Fantastic. If my daughter hears that word, we've taught that's a bad word, so believe me, I wouldn't be using it. Matthew, Benjamin and I went a bit back and forth. I just want to keen to get, what's your view? I'm gonna have a glass of water. What's your view on the whole Sharon Davis comments regarding the Supreme Court judgment over sex and the Equality Act?
I think the Supreme, for me, nothing has necessarily changed other than maybe those who are gender critical feel a little bit more emboldened in their opinions and views now. I think I was advising Labour MPs up until the general election, and my advice was always that it seemed clear to me that the Equality Act said that women should be allowed single-sex spaces, and if there were certain places, whether that be refuges or changing rooms, that weren't doing that, they would be falling foul of the Equality Act. That wasn't enough for some people, and therefore I agree with Benjamin that Nicola Sturgeon, a lot of this can be laid at her door with regards to rolling back things years. I just think we talk about this sort of stuff. How many trans people have you met?
I think one in the constituency, maybe two.
And this is
I'm
the
definitely
thing.
one at Hustings that I had in the 2024 election.
This is the thing. When Hayley Cropper was on the telly in Coronation Street, nobody cared. Actually, she was a bit of a sort of British icon at points. Nobody really bothered about it. Obviously, she's played by a woman, but the idea is, as it was known then, a transvestite being on the telly. Nobody cared. And we're talking about 0.5% of the population. Last year alone, there were 6,000 headlines talking about trans people. And I can't help but feel a lot of this is the media have found a very useful scapegoat to point at, which there's always been for generations. My understanding is the FA did update their guidance following the Supreme Court judgment. They said transgender people can play an amateur level as long as they meet very strict testosterone sort of, what do you call them, tests. Now, do you know how many footballers there is? There's millions of kids and young adults playing amateur football up and down this country. Do you know how many transgender people there is in the FA has registered? 20. And we're obsessing, for me, over this issue. I totally agree. Misogyny is a sickness in our society. Violence against women and girls is out of control. Femicide is totally out of control, and there's a whole toxic mix going on there. What I haven't seen is statistics that show, since there's been an increase in trans people, that there has been an increase of trans people attacking women. If there was, I think we'd be having a different conversation. And the sort of byproduct of this sort of stuff, and the stats I have seen and that are available, is the amount of quote-unquote butch lesbians that are being attacked in female toilets and changing rooms because people are assuming they are trans women or men or whatever they want to see them as. And I think I remember advising an MP years ago, how do we take the anger out of this debate? Stop calling it a debate. It's a conversation. There's a way of understanding each other and each other's point of view and being compassionate to both sides. I absolutely stand with women against misogyny and otherwise. I consider myself a feminist, but I do believe some people can feel dysmorphic in the way that they're in.
So do you know who I lay the blame at the door at? I blame the door at, not at trans people, who I think overwhelmingly, as you rightly say, were going about their lives. I blame it at gender extremists.
Still want to, by the way.
Gender ideological extremists, who actually, in most cases, I think aren't trans, but were seeking to try and hijack this cause as some sort of another extreme that they wanted to campaign on, have then besmirched the name of the trans community by going to the extreme of calling men cis men and women cis women and denying biological reality, and therefore has enabled it to become a heated debate, because they've gone to the extreme of calling for the death of J.K. Rowling, or demanding that they should be allowed to have access, or biological males should be allowed to have access to female changing spaces. So it's not the trans community I lay this at the door at, it's the gender extremist ideologues. I would call them the Marxists, the Trotskyists in our society, who are just seeking to have another fight, the anarchists, another fight on another issue in order to take it to the system. That's who I blame out, Benjamin.
Well, I've never heard Theresa May described as a Trotskyist before, but she was the Prime Minister.
I think she's a traitor for what she did on Brexit, you know. I think if you want me to have a strong opinion on that, but there you go.
Theresa May is the Prime Minister who started to change the rules so that you had self-ID rather than a legal process that gets this legal certificate. And
you can imagine how much of a fan I am of Theresa May, Benjamin.
Well, I actually think she's much better than the rest of you, but... But so it was her, and I don't think many people describe her as a Marxist, and indeed she put the head of Stonewall at the time. She made her a member of the House of Lords. But I just think, you know, this debate has become so hateful and so degenerate and so nasty and so unnecessary in most cases. You know, people have been living like this for decades, and they weren't a threat, and they're still not a threat. You know, Wayne Couzens didn't need to pretend to be a woman to go and murder Sarah Everard, right? Men attack and beat and murder women all the time in this country.
Again, we've got to be careful here all the time. We've got to talk about a section of men, a portion of men, not men overall.
Yeah, sure, but those men...
I accept it every day.
Those men have never pretended to be women. That's not how they do it. That's not how they get away with it. And so I think there's, you know, a vulnerable minority getting the blame for some nasty men that have actually got a rather useful scapegoat now.
And I'd agree on that in the sense of we should not judge any group, even Tories, by the way, even Tories, by very vocal, extreme voices, because that's always the way it is. We should not, and we have to always remember this. Listen, me and you get on despite having very different political views. There are some of your lot I think are absolutely awful, but they are the loud, awful extremists. I don't judge everybody else by that sort of colour. And I wouldn't do with the trans community, or I don't think every gender-critical person is a J.K. Rowling who seems to revel in the fact that she's causing quite a lot of misery despite her beliefs.
Well, Well, isn't this brilliant? So we're going to carry on the debate after the break. Make sure you're back here on Talk, the home of common sense. And we've got Danny Kruger, MP for Wiltshire. Oh, no, Devizes.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips, in Leeds it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us carry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12.60. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks
How
ago.
much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk. This is the home of common sense. I'm Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan. We are in the final hour. The final countdown is on. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by my 2 amazing commentators and guests, Matthew Torbett and Benjamin Butterworth, who have been doing fantastic stuff. And by me, have the text blown up since we started the trans debate here. Talk TV, stop referring to men in dresses as trans women. They are not a version of a woman. I'm shouting at my radio. Women don't challenge men in their spaces because we're scared. If it's dangerous for them to be with men, how come it's not dangerous for the women to have them in our spaces? No one asked us. I'm incandescent. That's Kate from Warwickshire, who Benjamin has also tweeted in, texted again saying, Benjamin Butterworth is totally misrepresenting the outcome of the Supreme Court. If they're men, they are banned from women's single-sex spaces. Can't women have anything for themselves? What would you say back to Kate, Benjamin?
Well, she's just wrong. It didn't say that. It said you can ban them, that it is legal to ban them because the Equality Act always had this provision for single-sex spaces. It doesn't say you must ban them. That's totally not what it said. And in fact, the judge specifically said this shouldn't be taken as a victory for either side, and we're not making a judgment on the wider debate. So, but the problem is they all immediately interpreted it as that, and I think that's going to cause a nightmare for so many organisations.
Well, because am I right in thinking, to put it into sort of layman's terms, the Equality Act allows basically a partial discrimination if you wish to ensure that only biological women are allowed in those spaces. Yeah, no, that's exactly what.
And that was always the law. And Harriet Harman, the minister that passed it in 2010, has always said that. But there was kind of, you get this a lot. There's sort of a mission creep on the interpretation.
Well, look, let's get to our next guest. Another big guest, another big beast of Westminster, and someone that I worked with closely. His name is Danny Kruger. He is a Conservative Member of Parliament serving, I'm going to say Devizes, Danny. Can I just double check the name on your constituency before I missay it again?
Well, it's not that anymore, Jonathan. It's East Wiltshire. They chopped out Devizes and gave it to the Liberal Democrats.
Oh, blimey. Well, I should know that. Obviously, my family from there, so I should have a better knowledge of the constituencies.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. 400 years of Gullis is roaming the Wiltshire countryside. God help Wiltshire. Danny, obviously, I can't help but ask about a colleague of yours, Robert Jenrick, who you were also, I believe, the campaign manager for in his leadership election. He's been a bit all over the news this week with what he said to students at UCL regarding potentially some sort of merger or coalition of some kind with Reform UK. He has, however, and I will just reiterate, which I'm sure you would too, that he actually said that that's a misrepresentation. He was saying about wanting to put Nigel Farage back into retirement. He said Kemi Badenoch was doing a, quote, bloody good job, and that, quote again, people should give her a break. Is Robert right? Is Kemi doing a bloody good job, and does she deserve a break?
I think she is doing a very good job, and it's a really difficult job to be doing. And it's true, I supported Rob for the leadership. I was in the same place as him on the ECHR and other policy questions. But I actually think Kemi is doing really well in very difficult circumstances. And I've got to say, if Rob had won, he'd be struggling too. The fact is, we just had a terrible defeat. The public don't trust us anymore. And if you're the leader, you get all the focus of that. So I think Kemi's got a tough job to do, and she's doing it well. What I understand Rob to have been saying is we need to unite the right by winning back those voters that we lost. And Jonathan, you and I were fighting in the second half of the last Parliament for our party to recognise the scale of disillusionment among those 2019 voters who put us into Parliament last time. They lost faith in us because we lost control of immigration. There's a number of other things as well. Rob recognised that too, and we were fighting for our party to recognise the problem and to fix the problems of immigration and to secure our borders, and we didn't do so, and we lost the election. Our overriding mission now, as Rob has been saying, and Kemi and all of us, is to restore trust with those voters by getting a policy platform that will really absolutely secure borders and bring down the overall unacceptably high levels of migration that we've seen in recent years.
Now, I think the biggest challenge that the Conservative Party has is not, if it comes up with new policy, actually making people believe and trust in the fact that they would actually deliver those policies. I'm intrigued and don't know if you're aware, but Michael Gove, at the start of our show tonight, Danny, said that he was now a supporter of the UK leaving the ECHR. Is this, as someone in yourself who has openly backed that, as you know, I put a bill in Parliament that was voted down by opposition MPs, a 10-minute rule bill saying we should do so too. Is this a welcome addition to the ranks of calling for common sense and that we need to leave the ECHR?
Yeah, well done, Michael Gove. I mean, a bit late. Rishi Sunak's said the same thing, I understand. I mean, I wish when they were in cabinet they were saying that. But yes, Kemi is taking steps in the same direction. I think she's acknowledged that there is a fundamental problem with the ECHR, and that if it can't be reformed, we have to be prepared to leave. So I think we are in the right place as a party now. But as you say, it's one thing to say the right thing; it's another for the public to actually believe us. When I'm afraid to say we promised to bring down migration in every general election going back to 2010, and we didn't do it. So there's more to be done than just the right policy platform, and it's going to take time, and that's our challenge. We haven't got long, and we are in a bad way, but I'm glad to say I do genuinely think that what Kemi has been doing very, very deliberately is to start putting the policy platform together, bringing people in from outside, empowering the front bench to develop the radical ideas that we're going to need, because it's not enough just to be sort of continuity Rishi. We've got to develop a new platform. We're under new management, as Kemi keeps saying. She's absolutely right. And the public are expecting us to develop ideas that are not just appropriate to the recent past, but to the new world that's emerging. And there's a huge range of very, very serious economic and social challenges that our country faces that this government is just making so much worse. I mean, you and I were campaigning in the election last year, making all sorts of terrible threats about how bad Labour would be. I didn't totally believe it myself. I partly bought the idea Keir Starmer's a sort of, looks like a sort of moderate guy. Actually, this government is far worse than we predicted. And we have got to get back into government in 2028, 29. I think Kemi's setting out the right path to do that. This great challenge of reform that you and I worry about, I think rightly, is there. The only way to deal with them is to convince the public that we have the ideas and the people who can deliver the change that's needed, and they don't need to look to a protest party. They can look to us to do that.
And now with policy, Danny, I know this is something you care deeply about, and you and I, obviously, as parliamentarians, just spent a lot of time actually writing ideas, both on the economy, on skills, and obviously, of course, on migration through what was then called the New Conservatives, a bit like what the Labour Growth Group has been formed out of in terms of within that former parliamentary party. You talk about the economy. I'm quite interested to hear about sort of where you think the direction of travel is. There's those in the parliamentary party that would probably call for a return to the Cameroon era, to the 2010 to 2015 Conservatism. There's people like myself who've been on a journey, who were certainly sort of laissez-faire kind of 1980s Lawson, Thatcher economic outlook. Then serving a community like Stoke-on-Trent, I'm hugely sceptical about free trade. I do concern that it's now just a monopoly for China and India predominantly, where they can subsidise energy food prices and use cheap or if indeed slave labour in many cases. Of course, as well, I look at how we've deindustrialised the country, not seeing those new jobs come into our area as well. And then, of course, there's the other element, which is that, you know, we do need to have key strategic infrastructure. And actually, I agree with Reform's position on nationalising British Steel, because we shouldn't lose the ability to have virgin steel making in this country. I'm intrigued to see, where do you see the future of conservatism? I know this is something that you've thought deeply about. Do you think it is slightly more interventionist economically, and then obviously what would be deemed as or called, dubbed right-wing on social and law and order and immigration?
The tension between, you know, free trade and protection, between being a laissez-faire economy and one in which government intervenes, is one that goes back to the beginning of our party's history, and it's split the party a number of times over the centuries. So it's real, and there are good conservatives who are on either sides of those debates. I mean, I'd kind of finesse it in this way. I do think we need free trade, but we need it within our country. We need lower taxes, lower regulation. We need more commerce between businesses and individuals in this country to drive growth, create jobs, particularly supporting the SME sector. Yes, that requires some intervention around infrastructure, around critical industries, and steel, I think, is a good example of that. Whether we need to nationalise or not, I'm not sure, but I do think we need to have a deliberate policy of supporting our critical industries in this country. Where I differ from more sort of free trade colleagues is on the global level. I don't think we actually really need to. I think there's a difference between free trade within a country, between being a low tax, low regulation economy, and then just saying that all trade between all countries should be completely frictionless. There should be no tariffs. It's great if that can happen between countries that are compatible, that share culture, that share a common way of doing things. So I would like to see more free trade with the US, with the Commonwealth, the Anglosphere, indeed with Europe as well. Of course, we have a free trade deal with the EU. Where I'm sceptical, as you are, is the idea that we can have essentially open borders in terms of movement of labour, but also of goods and services with countries which are very different from ours, which are essentially predatory in their approach to international trade, who dump their products on us, who have, as you suggested, far worse labour standards than we do, who exploit their environment in a way that we don't regard as acceptable. So yeah, we can't have, you know, tariff-free, low, unrestricted trade, particularly with China. I think that has hollowed out our own industry and our own economy, as you've suggested, and real social impact on places like Stoke, but also in, you know, places like mine in Wiltshire, small towns don't have the economy they're used to. And I think we do need to be much more deliberate about building up our own industrial base and our own economy. But I don't think that's about heavy intervention, certainly not high tax and regulation. We need genuine free trade within our country while protecting us from predatory competition from abroad.
Now, Danny, you talked about the EU and UK and trade, and obviously we have got this rumour, speculation that we're going to have a youth mobility scheme for 18 to 30-year-olds, which essentially, as many of our listeners would suggest, it sounds like sort of a return to free movement, particular cohort based on their age. We've also got the idea that we might be entering the EU carbon trading scheme, which would actually increase prices, if that's true, in our energy-intensive industries and household bills. There's also the idea that we might be willing to agree to dynamic alignment on agricultural rules, which means that we would be a rule taker. Do you consider the rumours, the speculation, that if this is the deal that Labour has done, it would be a great Brexit betrayal? And I know someone who actually worked with Boris Johnson, as you did, before entering Parliament yourself, who fought tirelessly to make sure that Brexit was done. Are you concerned that this is what Labour wanted to do all along, and they're just doing it and using the US trade war with China as kind of a cover?
Yes, I am. I think that's a good way of describing it. I'm very concerned. I think the carbon scheme is very, very dangerous and worrying. On the youth mobility scheme, I mean, personally, I'm open to. I think there's value in the idea of having more ease of people, young people, for a short period of time, going and working in other countries. I think that could be a positive step. I wouldn't regard that as a betrayal of Brexit, unless it was actively undercutting the skills agenda that we need. The great concern we have, and why we were also opposed to the high levels of European migration we had before Brexit, was that it essentially made businesses able to employ cheap labour. It undercut our own young people's career progressions. It made it harder for them to get into the trades that are needed to sustain our economy. So what I want to see us doing is equipping our own young people with the skills that they need to prosper. If there's a bit of people coming and going to working in coffee shops in Europe or in the UK, I could accept that. I think there might be some value in it. But the fundamental thing is that's got to be entirely peripheral and secondary to the main agenda, which is ensuring that we have proper skills for our own young people and that we don't import large numbers of people as we do now, tragically, with the post-Brexit deal that we did on the skills on the visa scheme, to have millions of people coming in every few years to work in low-paid jobs, bringing their dependents with them, often not sticking in the sectors that they got their visas for, and working in low-paid jobs which reduce wages for British people. We've got to stop this, this exploitation of cheap labour from abroad, and invest in British workers. That's got to be the absolute priority. And yes, I am very worried that what Labour are doing is seeking to undermine the Brexit gains, particularly if they're going to do a deal on fishing and food. I'd be very concerned about that as well.
And Danny, we had an exclusive in The Sun which talks about Stay Belvedere hotels who have raked in £700 million off the taxpayer through housing illegal migrants. I was keen to get, are you concerned that this is corporatism and essentially is just greed, and there's hotel chains looking to exploit the situation in order to feather their own nest? And do you think it also speaks to a larger point that, we have, as Jake Richards, Labour MP for Rother Valley, acknowledged earlier, boat numbers are unacceptably high, over 20,000 since the start of the year, 40% up on 2024, 80% up on 2023. Sir Keir Starmer promised to smash the gangs, but this just seems like another Labour lie, does it not?
Well, I'm afraid, absolutely. I mean, his strategy on the gangs has never been plausible. His idea was to talk nicely to the French, which is, totally inadequate. Obviously, speeding up the processing is welcome and necessary. He's continuing the work that we were able to start doing at the end of the last Parliament. But fundamentally, the only way to stop the boats is to ensure that everybody who's thinking of crossing the Channel knows that it's no point, because you'll be deported. And unless we're prepared and able to deport every illegal migrant pretty soon after their arrival, then we will never ever stop the boats. So that's the only way to do it, which is why we had the Rwanda scheme. We had all sorts of challenges and difficulties. Wish it wasn't necessary to use the Rwanda, but we should do something like that. On your hotels point, I mean, I can't blame the hotel group for taking money if it's offered to house the migrants. I mean, they're not charities, they're businesses, and I do think, we probably have a problem with the way the hospitality industry is structured. I mean, I'd rather see little local hotels, family owned, rather than these big chains. But nevertheless, the problem isn't with the hotels, it's with the government that is paying them so much taxpayers' money to house illegal migrants who should not be here. That's the problem we need to tackle. I don't want to blame the hotel group for the problem that is caused by the government.
And you talked about deportations. Interestingly, Jack Rankin, a colleague of yours, new Conservative MP for Windsor, signed an early day motion for Rupert Lowe, who has said that all illegal migrants should face mass deportations. It certainly caused a bit of a stir. Rupert Lowe celebrated the capture of the first Conservative signature of his early day motion. Do you plan on adding your name, Danny, to this early day motion, or are you with Rupert in spirit, but you avoid signing these EDMs as they're known?
Well, I don't know what your policy was, Jonathan. Mine has always said I don't sign EDMs. It enables me to avoid having to make all sorts of difficult commitments. I mean, early day motions, I'm afraid they're totally pointless, as you will remember from when we were in government. Ministers totally ignore them. They're just an opportunity for virtue signalling, I'm afraid. So no, I don't sign them. I signed one, which was no confidence in the speaker, which wasn't a very good idea. But apart from that, I don't sign them. In terms of the policy, though, in principle, it's absolutely right. If you're not allowed to be here, you should not be here. The practicalities of large-scale deportations are ones that we need to tackle. We should be removing people who have overstayed their visas. And certainly, as I've said, anybody who newly arrives illegally needs to go. And by the way, this is not a heartless approach. It's totally wrong for us to be essentially incentivizing people to make this expensive, dangerous crossing the whole of Europe crossing the Mediterranean, crossing Europe, crossing the Channel, because they know that if they do so, they'll get a home in the UK. It's very, very bad that we're doing this. It means they're jumping the queue for genuine refugees who we should be supporting, the vulnerable, the women, the children, not these comparatively wealthy young men. So I think we should absolutely, on humanitarian grounds, be much clearer that it's unacceptable. It's not possible for you to stay in the UK if you enter it illegally, and we need to be much stricter about that, and we need to set up arrangements with other countries to ensure that people can be deported, and we need to do it at scale and quickly and resolutely enough that within a period of months the demand would fall off and it would no longer be necessary to work at that kind of scale. So I think we'd only need to deport in the thousands, not the hundreds of thousands who are arriving at the moment, or the tens of thousands that are arriving. I think we need to support the first couple of months' worth of illegal immigrants, and that will be the end of it. We just need to do it.
And Danny, final one from me. I asked Michael Gove, does he respect Nigel Farage? I'll put that question to you. And also ask, how seriously do you take the reform threat? The polls are showing that the Conservatives have dropped a bit back on what they achieved in the general election. Of course, they have this high watermark going in to the local elections after the 2021 vaccine boost and bounce, as well as obviously post the Labour defeat in the 2019 general election. Should reform be taken as a serious, credible threat, or are they just a moment in time? And do you have admiration and respect for Nigel Farage and what he's done?
I genuinely do have respect for Nigel Farage, yes. I think he's a very significant figure. But as Robert Jenrick has said, I want to put him out of business, as we did temporarily in 2019, if you remember. He essentially retired. He only came back because we failed to deliver on our promises to the public. So we need to do that again. We need to put him out of business by convincing the public that we stand for their interests. I do take the threat of reform seriously. They are the consequence of our failure and of Labour's failure. Many, many people in this country are deeply disillusioned with what politics has done. Labour and Conservative governments have let the country down, and the beneficiary of that is a protest party led by Nigel Farage, who's very good at articulating the politics of protest. And we need to ensure that our party convinces the public that they should return to us, and that's a very, very difficult job. I think Kemi is doing a really, really good job of building our trust up again. It is going to take time. We don't have a lot of time. That is our problem. Labour are doing so badly, so quickly. That is why Reform are doing so well. I'm very hopeful that we're building back. The fight back is underway, and that those voters who are backing Nigel will come to us. And I don't think we'll prosper, by the way, by insulting him or other Reform MPs, or certainly not their activists and supporters. These people are natural Conservatives, and we need to be under one banner if we're to do what the country needs us to do, which is to win back power.
Well, Danny Kruger, Member of Parliament for East Wiltshire, Conservative and Shadow Minister in the Department for Work and Pensions, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we wish you all the very best for the weekend ahead. Before I go to the break, I was quite shocked. I think Danny was being very open and honest, which is always refreshing. We got Benjamin Butterworth, member, and Matthew Torbett in the studio with me. Danny has said that he doesn't blame the hotel, that it's not their fault for pocketing 700 million. If the system's there to help feather their nest, so be it. And was also open to the EU Youth Mobility Scheme, which I suspect Kemi Bay might not be best pleased that one of her shadow front bench said. Benjamin, what was your take on what Danny was saying?
Well, if the threat of being in a Britannia hotel won't put you off coming to Britain, I don't know what will. I stayed in one in Manchester. They're horrible. But he's right, of course. It's not the hotel's mistake. It's the mistake of the system that's allowing this to happen. What I'm really interested in is when he talks about how we need to make things in this country and reindustrialise, because we live in the Thatcherite consensus. That was when this changed. There was no bigger net zero zealot than Margaret Thatcher. She's the one who closed the coal mines. And the idea that was very profitable for a period was it doesn't matter where it's made. It matters that it's cheap and that it's accessible, and the market will decide everything. And I think, you know, do we live at the end of the Thatcherite consensus right now? Is that what's being dismantled? It's very strange to hear people of Danny Kruger's Conservative politics arguing for that.
I'm personally there, by the way. I think the 1980 sort of consensus on the economy is gone. I do think that I would be protectionist on coal, on steel, on ceramics, on agriculture in this country. And I suppose I was surprised myself, but the more I saw Stoke-on-Trent and the jobs being lost and then not replacing those jobs, whether that be those working in the coal mines of the past or the ceramics industries that have been going on, I suppose that's where my frustration came, and feeling that ever more that we're stuck in this system where we've got people in the London and South East sort of benefiting from, or seemingly being the only place that seems to benefit from this economic model. Matthew, what did you take? I thought, again, refreshing, and I think Danny is actually one of those quite refreshing MPs that generally is up for a conversation and putting ideas out there and likes a debate, and I think it'd be nice to have more MPs or be more frank, to be honest.
It's not the... No, it would be. That would always be much more preferable, I think. I wouldn't say it's the hotel's fault, but I remember raising this stuff in 2012, that there's been a racket for some time amongst... I wasn't going to name them, but Britannia Hotel was one of the ones in Stockport that got a load of flack, potential asylum seekers being attacked and whatnot. The Britannia Hotel is described as 4-star with a pool. Britannia Hotel in Stockport has roundly, for the last 7 or 8 years, been found the worst hotel in the country. The idea that it's a 4-star hotel. And I think the bigger problem of this is because, and me and you will disagree here now, if you are a potential asylum seeker that gets in a boat and comes across, you haven't come here illegally. And the reason why that is, and you'll laugh.
I'm laughing because I'm going to hold my tongue.
You can, because the 1951 convention, one is out of touch now. It's done. We set it up post-war, opening our arms, helping people World War II. We didn't have as many asylum seekers. The world was in a very different place. To come to this country, or any country in fact that signs up to the 1951 Refugee Convention, the only way you can claim asylum in this country is to be on its shores. There's no other way of getting here. There's no way you're getting on a plane from Afghanistan over to here. The likelihood is you're going to traipse through several safe countries. 98% of people go to the one next door, but you do get people coming over, and until you redo that convention, what we're seeing, which I'm sure you will agree in, is not just people that are potential asylum seekers that are genuinely fleeing persecution, which I haven't got an issue with. You have economic migrants on their coattails pretending to be the same, throwing their passports in the channel, lying about who they are, and they're ending up in these hotels. And because of that, we're also seeing, which will also cost us money, a 250% increase on refugee homelessness in this country.
Well, the good news is that we're going to go to a break, and I'm going to save my response about the idea of people not breaking into the country somehow being legal, which drives me around the bend to even hear that idea. But I will spare Matthew being yelled at by me, as I did with Benjamin earlier, because I want you to call in 0344 499 1000, text in word talk at the start of your message to 87222, and follow us and send a message on X at talkTV. We'll see you after this break.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organizations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, here on the home of Talk, the home of common sense, and I'm here stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan. I've got Matthew Torbett and Benjamin Butterworth in the studio with me, who've been suffering with my rants and raves. But before we get and spend a good chunk of time with those guys talking about all the amazing interviewees we've had on, as well as the stories we've been covering, I do want to get to our final guest for this evening, joining us down the line, and that is Ross Clark, author of Not Zero, a columnist for The Sun, who wants to talk about with us the quite remarkable sort of stories, particularly around Ed Miliband, who I suspect is having quite a difficult time of it at the moment. Obviously, British Steel being protected. I think he's facing challenge in the House of Lords over being able to buy his Chinese slave labour built solar panels. And so, Ross, what's going on here? We've got Rachel Reeves saying that the green rules are, quote, absolutely insane. Is she right?
Well, yes, she is right. She's saying that she's quoting things like the £100 million bat tunnel that's held up HS2. No, she's absolutely right that environmental rules have gone too far and they're preventing growth, they're preventing infrastructure being built. But on the other hand, don't forget that when Labour were in opposition and the Tories tried to liberalise some of the environmental rules around house building, they tried to sort of water down the nitrate rules to allow actually houses to be built. Labour were dead against it, and they said, "Oh, you can't do that. That's a vital part of the protection of nature." And of course, Labour, Rachel Reeves and so on, is a great fan of EU membership. Well, it's part of the EU Habitats Directive is a large part of the problem because it's over-prescriptive, demanded that wildlife habitats take precedence over any other kind of considerations. And I mean, a lot of the reason we have this excessive environmental regulation is down to that EU Habitats Directive. Now, we don't need to follow that anymore, but we still have been following it, and it ought to be an advantage of Brexit that we can move to common sense environmental regulations rather than the sort of excessive ones we've inherited from the EU.
The other challenge there for Labour is, of course, they made a huge deal about green energy being the future for helping produce economic growth. They've got their GB Energy, which is about investing in green solar, green wind, as they would say, as well. And obviously, we know that Labour stopped the coking coal mine in Cumbria, which could have supplied, despite some of the things put out there by Labour MPs, coking coal to support the British Steel, for example, rather than having it shipped in from Japan, which just seems completely at odds with the reality. And Labour have subsequently now even talking about rowing back slightly on the mandate for no new diesel and petrol cars back to 2035. Do you think Ed Miliband's in trouble here? Do you think that Labour's slowly going to row back from their net zero zealousy?
Well, he is in trouble because, he really is a zealot on this. He thinks that net zero will not only cut carbon emissions, but it's somehow going to enrich us, and every technology that we will need to get to net zero, he seems to think will magically be cheaper than what we do at the moment. And he's being rather found out, and he's sort of trying to deny that, the problems faced by the steel industry have anything to do with high energy prices. He tries to deny that our high energy prices have anything to do with our net zero targets and the fact we're trying to build this rather expensive national grid based on wind and solar. And he just keeps chirping the same things. He says wind and solar are much cheaper than gas power. But the thing is, if you're going to have a grid that's based on wind and solar power, you don't just look at the marginal cost of generating the electricity by that means. You've got to look at the cost of the backup and the storage to cope with the sort of intermittent forms of energy. And that's Miliband just hasn't got to grips with that problem. And you know, the trouble is, if you're going to store the energy, well, that costs several times as much as it does to generate it in the first place. The reason why gas-powered electricity is so expensive in this country is the way we're using gas. We're no longer using it as a base load that's you know, on all the time. We're using it here and there for a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there, in order to you know, make up for a shortfall of wind and solar, and that's a very expensive way of using gas. And the fact that the problem is exacerbated by what's called this marginal cost pricing, where you know, in every half-hour period, the most expensive form of electricity, which we use in that half hour, which is usually a gas power station that's turned on for a short period of time, that sets the price for all electricity. And that, you know, these are twin reasons why electricity is so expensive in this country, and sort of 4 times what it is in the US. It's not that we use gas, because the US is actually more reliant on gas for its electricity generation than we are, but they use it just in a sort of more sensible way.
Well, Ross Clark, a columnist for The Sun on Not Zero, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts about Labour's drive for, I suppose, trying to be Greta Thunberg's biggest fans, I would say, but a green lunacy that's going to kill the ceramics industry. I know that for certain, having spoken to the industry. The idea of hydrogen, for example, listeners, in ceramics is for the birds. The factories wouldn't be allowed to store hydrogen because it would be a risk to safety. The hydrogen power kilns would require numerous amounts of water on trucks being brought in, 3 to 4 a day per factory, and of course would also not necessarily produce the quality of the plate at the same rate, whilst China will continue to have coal-fired power stations, use gas and undermine the industry. Well, there you go, ladies and gents. That's the green reality for you. It's time to bin net zero as far as I'm concerned. And you can call in and tell me whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. I'll find out from Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett after the break. Call 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk at the start of your text at 87222. And message and follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, I don't know about Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett who joined me in the studio, but I am absolutely exhausted from the stream of great guests that we've had and the debate that we've had too. But it's great because hopefully you are tuning in here to the Political Asylum, the home of common sense, on Talk with myself, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan. And blimey, we've got some great calls and texts coming in. Just to read out a few of the texts, we've had, well said, Michael Gove, women, adult, human, female. Quite emotional hearing him praising Joanna Cherry and Rosie Duffield. Isn't the point of politics to find common ground? Something that seems to have been forgotten. Another one coming in saying, please tell Sharon Davies, that is the Olympian, former Olympian and women rights activist, saying, I love her. I have spoke up thinking us women were safer, but but I fear this mob will not listen. Other women could open their mouths to stand with me, and they do not. Another one saying, Jonathan Gullis, not one good decision has been taken by this hopeless government, and you don't get growth from having sky-high taxes to bail out the public sector. I can see why your party failed with liberals like you in it. I am quite shocked to be called a liberal. I think Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Torbett would be shocked to be called a liberal. I'm certainly not on that liberal wing of the Conservative Party, and it's not my party in government. If I'm now sounding like a Labour talker on this show, then I must have done something right. Maybe Keir Starmer will come offer me a job as an advisor.
You're making big overtures towards the Labour growth group. I'm thinking you're a secret member now, Gullis. I am.
I praised them maybe more than I should have done, and that will come to bite me in the future. Another one in trans men, even still, are obviously female. Height, facial structure, no Adam's apple. How dare a man, Benjamin, tell women we need males in our private spaces? If they feel unsafe in male loos, then why can't he understand that women feel unsafe with males in ours? There's no name on this, and write a reply, Benjamin.
Well, I mean, a trans man will probably have a beard and muscles and things, so I don't know why you want them in your women's loos. That seems pretty peculiar to me.
I'm loving this. And then Frank, in response to Danny Kruger, another deluded Tory, calling Reform a protest party. The Tories are in for another big shock. That I actually do wholeheartedly agree with. And I think let's see where the dust settles in the late hours of Friday night, after we've had the counts overnight on Thursday, and obviously counts that will go onto the day on Friday. But we are in Purda. I must make sure Ofcom are happy and that my producers don't spit out their tea, so we're not going to dare to tread on that toe anytime soon. We're going to go to our first caller, Georgina, who's from London. She's a mum of 4, and she's saying that about her young boys need to be praised, not vilified. Georgina, how are you?
I'm absolutely fabulous, Jonathan. Thank you for having me on this show. I'm actually a mother of 5.
5? I apologise, blimey.
4 fabulous sons.
Brilliant.
And a beautiful daughter.
You're doing your bit for the birth rate. Well done, by the way. Thank God. We've got a declining birth rate. We need more children being born.
Someone's got to do it, darling, and I'm doing my bit.
You hero.
I think that boys should be encouraged to celebrate their masculinity by their parents and guardians. They should be encouraged to show emotion and to be themselves. I mean, you've got to realise our sons have been fed a woke gender ideology in schools that has caused irreparable damage to some children, and I want to know who's going to be held accountable for that. It's unhealthy for them to bottle everything up. You know, you have a Prime Minister who's giving a message that young white boys are a problem in society, telling the parents and the schools to show our little boys in school the film Adolescent, which, by the way, is a fictional programme. You know, you may as well tell them to watch a Disney film for all that's worth. This is stigmatising our sons.
Well, Georgina, I would be cautious about a Disney film, because obviously we've got the ever plummeting, thank God, Snow White, because of the wokery, and Rachel Ziegler moaning about only being paid millions of pounds, but not apparently as much. And then obviously the complete rebranding of Disney to try and fit in with some gender ideology movement when no one else wanted it. I must say, Georgina, as you were talking, Benjamin Butterworth, who's in the studio with me, I think rolled his eyes, and I'm going to cheekily go to Benjamin. Is there anything you want to say to Georgina?
Well, it's just claptrap, isn't it? I mean, the idea that men who are adults now with these problems have these issues in expressing themselves and fitting into society because of woke gender ideology, which...
Well, it is woke and it is gender ideology.
Even if it's taught today, which is dubious, it wasn't taught 15 years ago when they were starting out in school, right? So it doesn't make any sense. And I don't understand how...
That's because masculinity was okay back then, and then the wokery took over, and apparently men had to be vilified all the time.
But the problem is that she's saying that you should express your masculinity, which is of course fine, but boys are told that expressing their emotions is the opposite of masculinity, and that's the problem.
Georgina, write a reply for you.
Absolutely not. Benjamin, how many children have you got?
I'm gay, I don't have any children, Georgina.
Well, I have a gay son. I have a gay son who has just got married. And I'm telling you that all of my sons were encouraged to show their emotions. Good. We don't do stiff upper lip in our house. You know, these are human beings, and they are allowed to show emotions, and most of the mothers I know, and I'm not a young woman, but most of the mothers I know do encourage our
So what's the
sons
problem? Why most people would call you woke for saying that?
Well, hang on a minute. It's your party that's been telling
What's it
our
got to do with
children
Labour?
for the last goodness knows how many years that men can have vaginas and cervixes. So come on, talk about make a child not know what's going on in the world. You have your party you stand for.
Agree, Georgina. Keep going. Keir Starmer doesn't know what a bloody woman is until the Supreme Court told him, did he?
I don't stand for any party. I'm a journalist, but I tell you what, I don't think the problems that men have anything to do with a couple of transgender people existing that have always existed. And actually, what you're saying about how you raised your sons and your friends and how they raised their kids sounds exactly right. But the problem is that lots of people like the Andrew Tates of this world would call you the woke zealot. But I think you're right.
So you, Benjamin, really, my love. Listen, I have got no problem with you, but you talk out of your bottom. I'm so sorry. You
I hate to hear what you say to people you do have problems with.
On bringing up children before you have the audacity to sit there and tell me how to bring up a child when you have never done that. And talking about being gay, that's got nothing to do with bringing up children. I know
it makes it less likely for me to impregnate someone.
Couples. Don't interrupt me. That's so rude. I know a lot of lovely gay couples who've got children and brought them up wonderfully. So don't sit there on your high horse saying that you're gay, you don't have children, because that in itself is nonsense.
Georgina, do you mind if I bring in my other panellist, Matthew Torbett, just to add in his thoughts? Matthew, over to you.
Yeah, so to bring it back to what Georgina said, I think there's nothing wrong in... She's basically advocating raising good human beings, celebrating masculinity, talking about their emotions, all very good, no issues with that at all. I think to lay the blame at schools is a little bit harsh. We was taught about people that were gay at school. It didn't make me gay. I knew who I was. The fact that people are taught about trans people doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be trans. You could have dressed me in genderless clothes. I was always going to be a straight man who likes women, because that's who I was. And I think that's the same. Would you have been influenced by transgender education at school? I don't think you would. I think you would have turned out how you were.
I wouldn't have liked being told that my biology lesson was completely fiction. I wouldn't have liked going to a PSEG lesson and being told that somehow a bloke who wears a dress is suddenly now a woman.
No, and that's where it gets misconstrued. I was always taught at university there are two different things. There are sex and gender, and one is a social construct and one is unobjectable science. I think with regards to adolescence, I know this has become like a bit of a left-right bun fight thing. I watched adolescence fully in the knowledge that it is a fictional, maybe loosely some truth sprinkled on it. I cried several times in that because I'm happy to talk about my emotions, because I recognised that child. I thought they did a good job because I wasn't a misogynist, but I was the one that felt a bit of an outcast at school. I was the one that thought it did a lot of good, and it's turned into this sort of left-right discourse sort of thing. Where I think, you know, it's a drama, yeah, fine, it's whatever, but dramas can also, a piece of art can go a long way to influencing people's, you know, politics and decisions.
Have we still got Georgina on the line? Just checking with the team. Sorry if she's gone. Benjamin, I want to give you the right to reply. Obviously, Georgina, passionate. You can imagine I agree with a lot of what she said, but obviously I didn't. You know, I think you are being balanced and you are being fair, and you were trying to just present an alternative viewpoint. So I always defend your right to free speech and your ability to have a different view.
Yeah, I mean, but look, the idea that, you know, that lady Georgina raised her kids to show their emotions is very healthy. The reason that the biggest killer of men under 40 is suicide is because men aren't able to talk about how they feel. It's seen as not being masculine, which is a massive problem. And I don't think you're going to fix the problem so long as that is a prevailing attitude. And I think there are too many men who behave like that and try and raise their sons in that image, and it just repeats the problem.
Well, look, what a great call that was. Thank you, Georgina. And I know that the team behind the glass enjoyed that as much as I did as well. And I'm sure Benjamin or Georgina, one day we can get you together over a cup of coffee
I think I might need something stronger. But,
and become the best of friends. But we're going to have our final break before coming back. So please call 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk to 87222. Message us on X at talkTV. You are on Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Jonathan Gullis, on the Political Asylum, in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan.
So if you look at the housing companies that are making lots of money, the subcontractors, which are the hotels, then you get the non-governmental organisations that get funding from the government to help the asylum applicants. Then you get those charities across the country that are really sucking off the teat of council taxpayers' money because they're also receiving it. You look into an industry, an asylum industry, that is running roughly around £20 billion a year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, I've had a great time here on the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for Kevin O'Sullivan with the amazing Benjamin Butterworth and the amazing Matthew Torbett, as well as all the amazing guests and callers like Georgina that we've had on the show too. And as I say, we are going to get that candlelit dinner for Georgina and Benjamin says, so let's sort out and film it. I think YouTube will want this.
Yes.
This is what we've all been waiting for. But look, we talked a bit about Danny Krug. Obviously, he said he was open-minded to the EU Youth Mobility Scheme. I'm not sure how helpful that was to Conservative campaign headquarters. We'll find out on that. We saw that he said the hoteliers can't be blamed. Yes, people should be angry about the money, but ultimately it's a failing of the system. Again, might be an unpopular message to say, but is also, as you both pointed out, just kind of a reality that this is if there's that level of cash available, people are going to try and pocket it. But I'm also interested. He went out of his way, didn't he, to really say how good a job Kemi Badenoch was doing. Now, as someone, as he openly admitted, was the campaign manager for Robert Jenrick, and as someone who is always, I think we saw, was quite sceptical of Rishi Sunak's leadership. Do we think Danny was just being a very good, loyal soldier, or do we think that he secretly, like other Tory MPs, I'm sure we're all hearing a whispering, is that it's a matter of when, not if, with Kemi Badenoch?
Oh, I mean, it makes me laugh, you know, the way that the MPs of different parties come on and say something's black when it's white. I mean, obviously she's useless, right? Obviously she's not a good leader of the opposition. She's not a good Tory leader. She doesn't have any impact. You know, no one could. You couldn't tell her what. You couldn't name a sort of phrase she's used, something that's landed landed. Nothing has broken through. You're going to do absolutely terribly if the Conservatives are. And it's just funny the way they come on and defend it, even though they don't think that in private. I reckon 12 to 18 months she's got as Tory leader, and then she'll be thrown out pretty easily. And I dare say Robert Jenrick will replace her.
Matthew.
Yeah, I think he obviously doesn't want to, have fingers pointed at him when the inevitable happens, because it seems totally inevitable. I think you would expect me to say this, but, I've always thought she was a political lightweight. I think because nobody had really heard of her, she overachieved in the first leadership challenge, and therefore has bought a little bit of credit for this time round. But she sort of, considering Keir, he's not very charismatic, some would say very boring, he's not a great performer, she makes him look good at PMQs. He genuinely, I think I'd missed this week's, but some people seem to think...
shocked on, yeah. Apart from this week's PMQs,
apparently
I've been shocked
she did
with
okay.
how... I really thought the one thing she is good at in that chamber is being in adversarial back and forth. And actually, she's normally very good at taking the first punch and then responding back with a much bigger one. And I've just not seen that personality in PMQs. It's like she's so focused on the questions and going through kind of what she's been told. I think they need to let her off the leash as far as I'm concerned in terms
Benjamin had it right, that she can't think on her feet. And I noticed that because she hasn't got the government machine behind her, she hasn't got the department's questions and answers, and therefore she's got to think for herself a little bit. I also think, as you'll know, the CCHQ operation is totally threadbare and there's no staff and anything else, no support.
And the staff there don't like her.
Well, quite. And if you watch her hand, I pointed this out a few weeks ago, her hand trembles at the dispatch box at PMQ, so I think she's still very nervous. I don't think she quite knows what type of leader she wants to be, what policies she wants to put forward. I think that's why there's a vacuum. She doesn't really know. Maybe there are similarities with Keir of she's probably going to say what she thinks she's got to say to win the election rather than what she actually believes, because that might not win the election. I think she's not a good actor in that sense.
I mean, I guess a level of human sympathy is that before they launched the local election campaign, some friends that work for Conservative headquarters that were working on that said she was really nervous before going to give the speech. And that surprised me, because she almost comes across as a little bit obnoxious at times, which is probably unfair, because it sounds like, and maybe you must know her better than me, that actually she's not overly confident and not overly comfortable in the position that she's in as a person.
My view is that too many Conservative MPs are not aware of, I've not realised the electoral reality the electors handed us in the last general election. They think because Labour's doing badly that somehow people come to us and reform will just fall apart and Nigel will walk away. And what basis they're doing that on, I have no idea, because if Nigel does get what I think could be 300 plus councillors, plus the mayor in Greater Lincolnshire, plus the potentially mayor in Hull and East Yorkshire, if he makes those kind of gains, then goes into the Scottish and Welsh elections next May as well, why would Nigel walk away if he's on 400, 500 plus councillors, the official opposition in Wales, or even potentially the government in Wales, and has as many MSPs in Scotland? What's the incentive? All the momentum is with them, and I think that too many Conservative MPs are living in a fantasy land and looking at reform in the House of Commons as not being a force, but not realising Nigel just needs to do a video on YouTube or on X or on TikTok and he gets millions of views. And I think they'll panic. I think these results are going to cause them to panic, and they're going to look around, and Kemi, therefore, will just get blamed without actually them having the decency to look at themselves and question themselves.
No, she's the wrong leader for the wrong time, because I would agree with Benjamin again that I thought James Cleverly would be the sensible choice, not only because I think he could bring Conservative voters back into the fold, tempt some potential Labour voters who aren't really Labour but they might have lent their votes from Conservative to Labour this time round. But is Kemi Badenoch really winning over any Lib Dems? In the vast majority of those southern seats where it's Lib Dem and Tory swing seats, she's not. She sees too far to the right for those sort of votes, as I think Robert Jenrick is as well. There's basically 70 seats that are up for grabs, of which they will all fall by the wayside because they're trying to out-reform at the moment, I think.
But I think Nigel Farage could be a victim of his own success, There's probably 4 years until the election. I actually think if they take councils, which they might, and if they take the Welsh Parliament whenever that comes up, well, if they're not very good at doing the job and making the decisions and actually having to make choices, then I think that will start to unravel to some extent. And so, people will be able to judge them on what they do with examples of power. I think that's a risk for him. Also,